Welcome back to another journey into the dark and twisted world of Bloodborne. If you found your way here tonight, then you know what we're about, diving deep into the rich, haunting lore that makes this gothic masterpiece so unforgettable. Before we begin, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. It helps us create more content like this way, more than you might think. Tonight, we're leaving the blood-soaked streets of Yharnam behind and venturing to one of the most mysterious and tragic locations in all of Bloodborne, Cainhurst Castle. This isn't just another ruined fortress dotting the landscape. No, Cainhurst represents something far more profound and heartbreaking. It's the story of a vampire kingdom that never truly was, a noble bloodline that reached for forbidden power, and a queen whose immortal reign became an eternal prison. Chapter 1. The Foundations of Noble Blood. To understand Cainhurst Castle and the tragedy that befell it, we must first understand the world from which it emerged. Long before the healing church dominated Yharnam with its blood ministrations, long before scholars from Bergenworth College delved into the Pothymerian labyrinths beneath the earth, there existed noble houses whose power rested not on cosmic revelation, but on something far more traditional: bloodline, heritage, and the ancient privileges of aristocracy. Cainhurst was one such house, perhaps the most prestigious of them all. The castle itself stood as a monument to centuries of accumulated wealth and refined culture. Its Gothic spires pierced the sky like accusatory fingers, while its vast halls echoed with the footsteps of generations who had known nothing but privilege and power. The very stones of Cainhurst had been cut and placed by artisans whose families had served the noble house for generations, each block carefully selected to create not just a fortress, but a work of art that would stand as testament to the eternal nature of aristocratic rule. The nobility of Cainhurst understood themselves to be fundamentally different from common humanity. This wasn't mere arrogance, though arrogance certainly played its part. Rather, it was a worldview built on centuries of careful breeding, education, and cultivation of what they believed to be superior human characteristics. They saw themselves as guardians of civilization, keepers of ancient knowledge and tradition, protectors of arts and culture that would otherwise be lost to the crude necessities of common survival. Within the castle's libraries, scrolls and tomes documented bloodlines stretching back through the mists of history. These weren't merely genealogical records, but sacred texts that traced the divine right to rule through carefully maintained genetic lines. The Cainhurst nobility believed that their blood itself was different, purer, more refined, carrying within it the accumulated wisdom and strength of their ancestors. Marriage within this social stratum wasn't just political alliance, but a careful cultivation of what they saw as humanity's highest potential. This belief in blood purity would prove to be both Cainhurst's greatest strength and its ultimate downfall. The same obsession with bloodline that had elevated the house to prominence would make them particularly susceptible to the seductive promises of the forbidden blood that would eventually corrupt their very essence. The castle's architecture reflected this philosophy of refined superiority. Every hallway was designed not just for function, but for beauty. The grand throne room could accommodate hundreds for state occasions, while intimate chambers provided spaces for the kind of sophisticated discourse that the nobility believed distinguished them from the masses. Art adorned every surface: paintings depicting glorious ancestors, sculptures celebrating noble ideals, tapestries that told stories of heroic deeds and royal romances. Yet for all its grandeur, Cainhurst was also a fortress. The nobility understood that their position required defense, not just from foreign enemies but from the resentment of those they ruled. The castle's walls were thick enough to withstand siege, its towers positioned to provide commanding views of the surrounding landscape, its gates designed to admit only those deemed worthy of entry. This duality, beauty and strength, refinement and pragmatism, characterized everything about Cainhurst culture. The servants who maintained this vast complex were themselves part of carefully structured hierarchies. House servants whose families had served for generations knew their place and took pride in maintaining the standards that made Cainhurst legendary. Master craftsmen created works of art that adorned the castle, while guards trained from childhood in the specific forms of combat that Cainhurst tradition demanded. Everyone within the castle walls understood their role in maintaining what they believed to be a perfect society. But perfection, as the residents of Cainhurst would learn, can become a trap. The very success of their isolated society made them blind to changes happening in the wider world. While they maintained their ancient traditions and celebrated their pure bloodlines, forces beyond their understanding were stirring in the depths beneath Yharnam. Scholars were uncovering secrets that would reshape the very nature of blood itself, and religious movements were emerging that would challenge the old certainties about nobility and divine right. The tragic irony of Cainhurst's story lies in this blindness to change. They had created such a perfect closed system, such an ideal reflection of their own values and beliefs, that they couldn't recognize the cosmic shifts that were making their entire worldview obsolete. The blood they prized so highly for its purity and noble heritage would prove to be exactly what made them vulnerable to forces that operated according to entirely different principles. Chapter 2: The Arrival of Forbidden Knowledge. The transformation of Cainhurst from noble house to something far more sinister began not with conquest or revolution, but with an invitation, one that arrived in a manner befitting the refined tastes of aristocratic society. This was no crude demand for submission, no obvious threat that the castle's defenses could repel. Instead, it came as an offer of alliance, a proposal of mutual benefit, wrapped in the kind of sophisticated political language that the Cainhurst nobility understood and appreciated. The invitation came from an unexpected source, representatives of what would become known as the Healing Church, though at the time they presented themselves simply as scholars and healers who had made remarkable discoveries about the nature of blood itself. These weren't rough street preachers or wild-eyed fanatics, but educated, well-spoken individuals who could hold their own in the kind of sophisticated discourse that Cainhurst society valued. They spoke of medical breakthroughs that could eliminate disease, of treatments that could extend life far beyond its natural span, of possibilities that seemed to offer everything the nobility had always believed their superior breeding should provide. What made this invitation particularly compelling was how it appealed to Cainhurst's deepest beliefs about the significance of bloodline. The church representatives didn't challenge the nobility's conviction that their blood was special. Instead, they confirmed it. They suggested that the pure bloodlines the nobles had so carefully maintained made them ideal candidates for an even greater refinement, a transformation that would elevate their already superior nature to heights previously unimaginable. Queen Annalise, who ruled Cainhurst with the kind of absolute authority that only centuries of unquestioned succession could provide, received these representatives in the great throne room where so many momentous decisions had been made. The Queen was herself the perfect embodiment of Cainhurst ideals, beautiful in the ethereal way that seemed to characterize the highest nobility, educated in arts and sciences that few outside the castle walls could even comprehend, possessed of a presence that made her authority seem as natural and inevitable as the sunrise. The representatives spoke of old blood, a substance of power beyond anything the healing arts had previously achieved, but they were careful to emphasize that this wasn't some common remedy to be distributed among the masses. Rather, it was a treasure reserved for those whose existing blood was already refined enough to handle its transformative power. Common folk, they explained, would be overwhelmed by such potency. Only those with the purest bloodlines could safely undergo the transformation and emerge elevated rather than destroyed. This message resonated perfectly with everything Cainhurst believed about itself. Here, finally, was confirmation that their centuries of careful breeding, their obsession with bloodline purity, their conviction that they were fundamentally different from ordinary humanity, all of this had been preparation for something greater. The old blood wasn't a gift to humanity in general, but a reward specifically for those who had proven themselves worthy through generations of noble refinement. Queen Annalise accepted the offer, but she did so with the kind of calculated caution that had allowed her lineage to survive and prosper for so long. Rather than embracing the transformation immediately, She requested a demonstration, a proof of the old blood's power that would allow her to make an informed decision. The church representatives readily agreed, bringing with them samples of the precious substance and describing the careful rituals that would ensure a successful transformation. The first experiments took place in the castle's private chambers, away from the view of servants or lower nobility who might not understand the significance of what was occurring. Queen Annalise selected volunteers from among her most trusted advisors and family members, individuals whose loyalty was absolute and whose bloodlines were considered the purest within Cainhurst society. These weren't desperate subjects seeking healing from disease or injury, but healthy, powerful individuals who sought to become something even greater. The initial results seemed to confirm everything the church representatives had promised. Those who received the old blood transfusions experienced remarkable enhancements to their physical capabilities. Strength increased beyond human norms, senses became sharper and more acute, and most remarkably, the aging process seemed to slow or stop entirely. Wounds healed with supernatural speed, resistance to disease became absolute, and a sense of vitality pervaded every aspect of existence. But perhaps most significantly, the transformation enhanced rather than diminished the psychological characteristics that the nobility valued most highly. Intelligence seemed to sharpen, aesthetic appreciation deepened, and the sense of superiority that had always characterized Cainhurst culture became not just a belief, but a tangible reality. Those who underwent the transformation didn't lose their humanity. They felt as though they had finally achieved the full potential that their noble breeding had always promised. Word of these successes spread throughout the castle, creating a demand for the old blood that Queen Annalise was careful to manage through the same kind of hierarchical systems that governed all aspects of Cainhurst society. The most pure bloodlines received priority, the most trusted advisors were included first, and the process was conducted with the kind of ceremony and ritual that reinforced its significance as a reward for nobility rather than a common medical treatment. The transformation of Cainhurst's nobility created what appeared to be the perfect synthesis of aristocratic ideals and supernatural power. Here was a ruling class that could legitimately claim to be superior to ordinary humanity in every measurable way. Their enhanced capabilities made them better rulers. Their extended lifespans allowed them to accumulate wisdom and experience far beyond normal human limits, and their improved aesthetic sensibilities made them patrons of arts and culture on a scale previously impossible. Yet, even in these early days of success and celebration, careful observers might have noticed subtle changes that suggested the transformation was more complex than it initially appeared. The enhanced nobility showed less interest in the wider world beyond Cainhurst's walls, preferring the refined company of their fellow transformed individuals to the crude concerns of ordinary politics. Their aesthetic tastes, while more refined than ever, began to favor darker themes, art that explored death and decay, music that emphasized minor keys and melancholy themes, literature that dwelt on themes of loss and isolation. Chapter 3: The Birth of the Vilebloods. The success of the old blood transfusions at Cainhurst led to the emergence of something unprecedented in the world of Bloodborne. An entire noble class that had transcended ordinary human limitations, while retaining the sophisticated culture and social structures that had defined their identity for centuries. But this wasn't simply enhanced humanity. What emerged from the transformation was something new, something that would come to be known by a name that perfectly captured both its pride and its corruption: the Vilebloods. The term itself reveals the complex nature of what Cainhurst had become. To the outside world, particularly to the emerging healing church and its followers, these transformed nobles were abominations, beings whose pursuit of power had led them to embrace forbidden blood that corrupted their very essence. The word vile suggested moral corruption, spiritual decay, an abandonment of everything that should make blood sacred and pure. But to the inhabitants of Cainhurst, the name carried entirely different connotations. They embraced the title with the kind of proud defiance that aristocracy had always shown toward the disapproval of their social inferiors. If the common masses and their religious leaders chose to call their blood vile, then so be it. The Vilebloods understood that true power had always been misunderstood and feared by those too weak or pure to claim it for themselves. Queen Annalise, now transformed and possessing capabilities that made her previous royal authority seem quaint by comparison, established herself as the undisputed ruler of this new order. Her transformation had been the most successful of all, granting her not just enhanced physical and mental capabilities, but a kind of preternatural charisma that made her authority seem as natural and inevitable as gravity itself. She became the Vileblood Queen, a title that suggested both the corrupted nature of her power and her absolute dominion over those who shared her transformation. The Vileblood society that emerged under her rule represented a fascinating fusion of traditional aristocratic values and the new possibilities created by their supernatural nature. The same hierarchies that had governed Cainhurst for centuries remained in place, but they were now reinforced by actual differences in power and capability, rather than mere social convention. The most successful transformations produced individuals of genuinely superior abilities, while those whose bloodlines proved less compatible with the old blood remained in subordinate positions. This created a society that was, in many ways, a perfect realization of aristocratic ideals. Here was a ruling class that could legitimately claim to be superior to their subjects in every measurable way. Their enhanced physical capabilities made them better warriors. Their extended lifespans allowed them to accumulate wisdom and experience beyond normal human limits. Their improved mental acuity made them more effective administrators and leaders. The old aristocratic claim that noble blood made them naturally suited to rule had become literal truth. Yet the Vileblood society also developed characteristics that would have been alien to the traditional nobility they had once been. Their enhanced senses and supernatural capabilities led them to develop new forms of art and culture that reflected their transformed nature. Music became more complex and layered, incorporating sounds and harmonies that normal human ears couldn't detect or appreciate. Visual arts explored themes and utilized techniques that required superhuman perception to fully understand. Literature delved into philosophical concepts that presupposed lifespans measured in centuries rather than decades. Perhaps most significantly, the Vilebloods developed a relationship with blood itself that went far beyond anything their ancestors could have imagined. For traditional nobility, blood had been important primarily as a symbol, a representation of lineage, heritage, and genetic inheritance. But for the Vilebloods, blood became something approaching a sacrament. They discovered that different types of blood carried different properties and powers, that the act of consuming blood wasn't merely sustenance, but a form of communion with forces beyond ordinary understanding. This led to the development of what could only be described as blood worship, elaborate rituals and ceremonies centered around the collection, preparation, and consumption of various types of blood. These weren't the crude feeding frenzies that characterized the beast scourge plaguing Yharnam, but sophisticated religious practices that treated blood as a sacred substance deserving of the kind of reverence traditionally reserved for religious relics. The Vilebloods discovered that blood from different sources carried different spiritual and practical properties. The blood of particularly pure individuals could enhance their own capabilities, while blood taken from those who had undergone certain experiences could grant temporary access to memories and knowledge that weren't their own. Most remarkably, they learned that blood freely given carried far more power than blood taken by force, leading to the development of complex social and religious practices designed to encourage voluntary offerings from those they deemed worthy. This development created the foundation for what would become one of the most distinctive aspects of Vileblood culture, the system of blood offerings that would later be formalized in the covenant that hunters could join. The concept was elegantly simple. Individuals who proved themselves worthy through demonstrations of skill, courage, or dedication could offer their blood to the Vileblood Queen, receiving in return protection, guidance, and access to powers beyond normal human capability. The Vilebloods saw this system as the perfection of the traditional relationship between nobility and their subjects. Rather than demanding mere taxes or military service, they offered their followers the opportunity to participate directly in the supernatural power that made Vileblood society possible. Those who joined their covenant weren't just subjects or servants, but participants in a grand project of human transcendence that would ultimately benefit everyone involved. Queen Annalise herself became the focal point of this system, not just as political ruler, but as a kind of living goddess whose very existence demonstrated the possibilities that awaited those who proved themselves worthy. Her court became a place where power, beauty, and knowledge converged in ways that seemed to offer everything that humanity had ever dreamed of achieving. Visitors who gained audience with the Vileblood Queen often described the experience as life-changing, an encounter with perfection that made ordinary existence seem dull and meaningless by comparison. Yet even in this golden age of Vileblood culture, there were those who recognized the dangerous currents beneath the surface elegance. The same isolation that protected Cainhurst from outside interference also cut it off from sources of knowledge and perspective that might have warned them about the true nature of the forces they had embraced. The old blood that had granted them such remarkable powers came with origins and purposes that the Vilebloods didn't fully understand, and their growing dependency on blood consumption created vulnerabilities that they were only beginning to recognize. Chapter 4: The Cosmic Horror Beneath Aristocracy. The true tragedy of the Vilebloods wasn't their transformation itself, but their fundamental misunderstanding of what that transformation actually meant. They believed they had achieved the ultimate refinement of aristocratic ideals, a perfect synthesis of noble breeding and supernatural power that vindicated everything their culture had always claimed about the superiority of pure bloodlines. But in reality, they had become unwitting participants in a cosmic horror story whose scope and implications were far beyond anything their refined sensibilities could comprehend. To understand what really happened at Cainhurst, we must step back and consider the true nature of the old blood and the forces that had originally created it. The church representatives who had approached Queen Annalise with their offer of transformation hadn't been lying when they described the blood's remarkable properties, but they had omitted crucial details about its origins and ultimate purpose. The old blood wasn't simply a medical discovery or an alchemical achievement. It was a tool being used by cosmic entities whose relationship with humanity was far more complex and sinister than anyone involved in the Cainhurst transformation understood. The Great Ones, those cosmic beings whose influence permeated every aspect of Bloodborne's world, possessed capabilities and perspectives that made human concerns seem trivial by comparison. They existed across multiple dimensions of reality, experienced time as a fluid rather than linear phenomenon, and wielded power that could reshape the fundamental laws of existence. But for all their cosmic might, they suffered from a limitation that drove everything they did: an inability to successfully reproduce their own kind. This cosmic infertility created a desperate hunger that transcended ordinary desire. The Great Ones yearned for children with an intensity that colored every aspect of their existence, and their failure to create offspring of their own species had led them to seek surrogates among other forms of life. Humanity, with its rich emotional capacity and complex consciousness, represented particularly promising material for this surrogacy project. But humans couldn't simply be adopted wholesale. They required transformation, refinement, and preparation before they could serve the purposes that the Great Ones required. The old blood was one of the primary tools in this transformation process. It didn't just enhance human capabilities, it gradually rewrote human consciousness and physiology to make individuals more suitable for cosmic adoption. The process was subtle enough that those undergoing it interpreted the changes as improvements rather than fundamental alterations to their nature. Enhanced strength, extended lifespan, improved mental acuity, all of these were genuine benefits that made the transformation seem desirable, but they came with psychological and spiritual changes that prepared the subjects for roles they didn't understand, in cosmic projects they couldn't imagine. The Vilebloods' obsession with blood consumption wasn't simply a side effect of their transformation. It was a carefully engineered dependency that served specific cosmic purposes. Blood, in the world of Bloodborne, was more than biological fluid. It carried memory, consciousness, and spiritual essence. By consuming blood from various sources, the Vilebloods were unknowingly participating in a vast network of consciousness sharing that allowed the Great Ones to monitor and influence their development. Each blood offering made to Queen Annalise, each ritual consumption of sacred blood, each ceremony celebrating their transformed nature, contributed to a cosmic database of human experience that the Great Ones used to refine their understanding of how to create suitable surrogate children. The Vilebloods believed they were pursuing their own enhancement and empowerment, but they were actually providing raw material for cosmic experiments, whose ultimate goal was the creation of beings that could bridge the gap between human consciousness and cosmic awareness. Queen Annalise's transformation had been particularly successful, precisely because her noble breeding and aristocratic mindset made her an ideal subject for cosmic manipulation. Her belief in her own inherent superiority created psychological frameworks that cosmic influence could exploit and amplify. Her comfort with hierarchy and authority made her naturally suited to serve as an intermediary between cosmic powers and human subjects. Her sophistication and cultural refinement provided the kind of consciousness that the Great Ones found useful for their reproductive experiments. The tragic irony was that everything the Vilebloods prized about their transformation, their enhanced capabilities, their extended lifespans, their supernatural power, was gradually isolating them from the human experiences and perspectives that had made them valuable as surrogate children in the first place. The more successful their transformation became, the less human they remained, and the less useful they became for the cosmic purposes they were unknowingly serving. This created a feedback loop that would ultimately doom Vileblood society. Their pursuit of ever greater refinement and power led them further from their human origins, but their cosmic patrons continued to demand more transformation, more enhancement, more movement toward the kind of consciousness that could serve as an effective bridge between mortal and cosmic awareness. The Vilebloods found themselves trapped between their desire to maintain their aristocratic identity and the inexorable pressure to become something that wasn't really human at all. The isolation of Cainhurst Castle, which had originally protected the nobility from outside interference, became a kind of prison that prevented them from recognizing what was happening to them. Cut off from ordinary human society, surrounded only by others undergoing the same transformation, lacking contact with perspectives that might have warned them about the dangers they faced, the Vilebloods had no way to understand that their apparent triumph was actually a form of spiritual enslavement. The blood rituals that became central to their culture weren't expressions of their own will and desire, but responses to cosmic programming that had been subtly implanted during their transformation. Their aesthetic preferences, their social structures, their religious practices, all of these were being gradually shaped by influences that operated according to principles completely alien to human values and goals. Even Queen Annalise, for all her intelligence and power, couldn't recognize that her reign over the Vilebloods was actually a form of cosmic middle management, a position that allowed her to feel powerful and important while actually serving purposes that had nothing to do with her own interests or the welfare of her subjects. Her immortality, which seemed like the ultimate aristocratic privilege, was actually a cosmic investment in maintaining a stable interface between human and cosmic consciousness. The Vilebloods had become actors in a play they didn't understand, following a script they couldn't read, serving purposes they couldn't imagine. Their refined culture and sophisticated society masked a fundamental loss of agency that grew more complete with each passing year. They believed they were the masters of their own destiny, but they were actually products being prepared for cosmic consumption. Chapter 5. The Church's growing concern. While the Vilebloods celebrated their transformation and built their blood-centered society in the isolation of Cainhurst Castle, the broader world was undergoing its own profound changes. The Healing Church, which had originally provided the old blood that made Vilebloods society possible, was rapidly evolving from a small religious movement into the dominant political and spiritual force throughout the region. But this evolution brought with it a growing awareness of the true dangers posed by uncontrolled blood experimentation, and the existence of an entire castle full of transformed nobles began to seem less like a successful alliance and more like a dangerous precedent that threatened everything the church was trying to achieve. The church's leadership had never intended to create something like the Vilebloods. Their original approach to Queen Annalise had been part of a broader strategy to establish alliances with existing power structures, rather than attempting to replace them entirely. By offering the old blood to establish nobility, they had hoped to create a network of enhanced allies who could help legitimize and protect the church's growing influence. The transformation of individual nobles was seen as a manageable risk that would produce useful allies, while allowing the church to maintain control over the broader distribution of old blood. But the Vilebloods had evolved beyond anything the church had anticipated or desired. Rather than becoming enhanced, but still fundamentally human allies, they had developed into something approaching a separate species, with its own culture, values, and goals. Their blood-centered religious practices represented a direct challenge to the church's authority, while their claims of superiority based on successful transformation threatened to undermine the careful hierarchies that the church was establishing within its own ranks. Perhaps most troubling, the Vilebloods had begun to demonstrate an independence that suggested they no longer needed or wanted church guidance. Queen Annalise's court was developing its own theological interpretations of the old blood significance, its own ritual practices for blood consumption and sharing, and its own systems for identifying and recruiting new members. This wasn't the kind of dependent alliance that the church had envisioned, but the emergence of a rival religious and political organization that could potentially challenge church authority throughout the region. The church leadership began to receive reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of what was happening at Cainhurst. Travelers who had gained audience with the Vileblood Queen described ceremonies and practices that seemed to blur the line between sophisticated religious observance and outright blood worship. Stories circulated about Vileblood agents who were actively recruiting new members from among the nobility of other regions, spreading their influence beyond Cainhurst's borders and potentially creating a network of blood-enhanced aristocrats who owed no allegiance to church authority. More alarming still were reports about the theological implications of Vileblood beliefs. The transformed nobles weren't simply using the old blood as a medical treatment or spiritual enhancement. They were developing religious interpretations that positioned blood itself as a divine substance deserving of worship and reverence. This represented a fundamental challenge to the church's carefully constructed theology, which positioned the church hierarchy as the necessary intermediary between humanity and the cosmic forces that had provided the old blood. The Vilebloods were suggesting through both their practices and their very existence that individuals with sufficient purity and strength could establish direct relationships with these cosmic forces without church mediation. This wasn't just theological disagreement, it was a challenge to the entire foundation of church authority. If enhanced nobles could achieve their own transformation and establish their own religious practices, what need did they have for church guidance or supervision? Church scholars began to study the theological and practical implications of the Vileblood phenomenon. With growing alarm, they recognized that the kind of society emerging at Cainhurst represented everything they were trying to prevent: uncontrolled distribution of old blood power, religious practices that operated outside church authority, and the development of enhanced human communities that might ultimately prove hostile to church interests. The situation was made more complex by the fact that the church couldn't simply dismiss the Vilebloods as failures or abominations. The transformation had clearly been successful in many ways, producing individuals with capabilities that exceeded anything the church had achieved through its own more cautious approach to old blood use. Queen Annalise and her most successful followers demonstrated levels of enhancement that suggested they had achieved something approaching the cosmic consciousness that represented the ultimate goal of church theology. This created a dilemma that church leadership struggled to resolve. On one hand, the Vilebloods represented a dangerous precedent that could inspire others to seek transformation outside church control. Their success proved that the old blood could produce remarkable results when used without the careful limitations and hierarchical restrictions that the church insisted were necessary for safe transformation. This threatened to undermine the church's entire approach to blood distribution and spiritual guidance. On the other hand, the Vilebloods also represented a valuable source of information about the ultimate possibilities of old blood transformation. Their experiments in blood consumption, consciousness sharing, and cosmic communion had produced insights that could potentially advance church understanding of the transformation process. Destroying them entirely would mean losing access to centuries of accumulated knowledge about successful blood enhancement. The church's response to this dilemma was initially diplomatic, but increasingly aggressive. They began by attempting to re-establish formal relationships with Cainhurst, sending emissaries who offered various forms of cooperation and mutual benefit. These diplomatic missions were designed to assess the current state of Vileblood society while attempting to reassert church influence over their development. But the Vilebloods' response to these overtures revealed the extent to which they had moved beyond church influence. Queen Annalise received church emissaries with the kind of polite condescension that aristocracy had always shown toward those they considered social inferiors. She made it clear that while she was willing to maintain friendly relations with the church, she had no intention of subordinating Vileblood interests to church authority or accepting church supervision over Cainhurst's internal affairs. This diplomatic failure convinced church leadership that more direct action would be necessary to address the Vileblood threat. They began to develop plans for what they characterized as a necessary intervention to prevent the spread of dangerous blood practices and protect the spiritual welfare of the broader population. The Vilebloods, they argued, had been corrupted by their uncontrolled consumption of old blood and could no longer be trusted to make responsible decisions about their own development or the welfare of those they influenced. Chapter 6: Martyr Logarius and the Executioners. The Healing Church's growing concern about the Vilebloods eventually crystallized around a single, charismatic figure whose dedication to church doctrine and personal magnetism made him the perfect leader for what would become one of the most tragic military campaigns in Bloodborne's history. Martyr Logarius emerged from the church's militant wing as a man who embodied everything the institution claimed to represent: absolute devotion to cosmic truth, unwavering commitment to protecting humanity from spiritual corruption, and the kind of personal courage that inspired others to follow him into situations where survival was far from guaranteed. Logarius wasn't simply a military commander or religious fanatic, though he possessed qualities of both. Rather, he represented the church's attempt to synthesize spiritual authority with martial effectiveness, creating a new type of leader who could pursue church goals through direct action while maintaining the moral authority necessary to justify those actions to both followers and the broader public. His title of martyr wasn't bestowed after his death, but rather reflected his willingness to sacrifice everything, including his own life, for the advancement of church principles. The origins of Logarius remain somewhat mysterious, but available evidence suggests he was originally a scholar who had undergone significant transformation through controlled exposure to church-sanctioned old blood treatments. Unlike the Vilebloods, whose transformation had been rapid and comprehensive, Logarius had experienced a more gradual enhancement that preserved his essential humanity while granting him capabilities far beyond normal human limitations. This made him living proof that careful, church-supervised transformation could produce individuals who were both powerfully enhanced and completely loyal to church authority. His intellectual background as a scholar gave Logarius a deep understanding of the theological implications of the Vileblood phenomenon that went beyond simple military concerns. He understood that the existence of a successful blood-enhanced society operating outside church controls represented a fundamental challenge to everything the church taught about the necessity of spiritual guidance and institutional authority. The Vilebloods weren't just political rivals. They were living proof that church doctrines about the dangers of uncontrolled transformation might be wrong. This theological dimension made the conflict with Cainhurst intensely personal for Logarius. He saw the Vilebloods not just as enemies to be defeated, but as representations of everything that was spiritually dangerous about uncontrolled cosmic communion. Their apparent success was, from his perspective, a kind of cosmic deception that would ultimately lead to spiritual corruption and the loss of essential human values. The fact that they appeared to be thriving only made them more dangerous, as it might inspire others to seek similar transformation outside church guidance. Logarius gathered around himself a group of like-minded individuals who shared his conviction that the Vileblood threat required direct action. These followers, who became known as the executioners, represented the church's most committed enforcers, individuals who were willing to use violence in service of what they believed to be cosmic justice. But they weren't crude thugs or mindless fanatics. Rather, they were carefully selected and trained individuals who combined martial effectiveness with genuine religious conviction. The executioner organization that Logarius created represented a new development in church structure, a military order that operated according to both religious and martial principles. Members underwent extensive training that combined physical conditioning, weapons mastery, and theological education. They were expected to be scholars as well as warriors, capable of explaining the spiritual rationale for their actions, while possessing the combat skills necessary to implement church policy through force when diplomacy failed. Logarius equipped his executioners with weapons and equipment that reflected their unique role as religious warriors. Their signature weapon, the wheel, represented both the cyclical nature of cosmic justice and their willingness to crush anything that stood in the way of spiritual truth. This wasn't just a practical tool for combat, but a symbol that embodied their understanding of their role as instruments of divine will operating in a corrupted world. The theological training that executioners received was as intensive as their military preparation. They studied church doctrine extensively, learning to understand the cosmic principles that governed proper relationships between humanity and the Great Ones. They were taught to recognize signs of spiritual corruption and to distinguish between legitimate enhancement through church-sanctioned blood use and the dangerous transformation that resulted from uncontrolled cosmic communion. This combination of religious conviction and martial training made the executioners formidable opponents, but it also created psychological tensions that would ultimately contribute to their tragic fate. They were taught to see themselves as heroes, engaged in a cosmic struggle between spiritual truth and dangerous corruption, but they were also required to use violence against individuals who appeared to be successful, sophisticated, and genuinely enhanced by their transformation. The cognitive dissonance between the official narrative about Vileblood corruption and the actual evidence of Vileblood success created stress that many executioners struggled to resolve. Logarius himself seemed immune to these doubts, maintaining an absolute conviction that church doctrine provided the only reliable guide to cosmic truth. His charisma and apparent certainty inspired confidence in his followers, but they also prevented the kind of questioning and critical thinking that might have led to a more nuanced understanding of the Vileblood phenomenon. He created an organizational culture that valued loyalty and obedience above independent judgment, ensuring that his followers would implement his decisions without the kind of hesitation that might have prevented the tragedy that was about to unfold. The preparations for the assault on Cainhurst took months and involved careful coordination between various church factions. Intelligence was gathered about castle defenses. Supply lines were established to support a prolonged siege, if necessary, and diplomatic cover was prepared to justify the action to other noble houses who might be concerned about church aggression against aristocratic targets. The church leadership presented the coming assault as a necessary intervention to prevent the spread of spiritual corruption rather than an attack on legitimate authority. As the executioners prepared for their mission, they were repeatedly reminded of the cosmic significance of their actions. They weren't just attacking a rival political faction, but striking a blow against forces that threatened the spiritual welfare of all humanity. The Vilebloods represented everything that could go wrong when humans attempted to transcend their limitations without proper guidance and the executioner assault would serve as both punishment for past corruption and warning to others who might be tempted to follow similar paths. Chapter 7. The Siege of Cainhurst. The assault on Cainhurst Castle began on a winter morning when thick snow muffled sound and limited visibility, creating conditions that favored attackers who knew the terrain and had carefully planned their approach. Logarius had spent months studying the castle's defenses and developing tactics that would allow his executioners to overcome the supernatural capabilities of the Vilebloods through superior planning, coordination, and the righteousness of their cause. What followed was not merely a military engagement, but a clash between two entirely different visions of humanity's cosmic destiny. The executioners approached Cainhurst with the kind of methodical precision that characterized all of Logarius's operations. They weren't simply attacking in the hope of overwhelming their enemies through brute force, but implementing a carefully designed strategy that accounted for the enhanced capabilities of their opponents, while maximizing their own advantages in training, equipment, and tactical coordination. Each member of the assault force understood their specific role in the broader plan, and each had been prepared both practically and spiritually for the challenges they would face. The initial approach to the castle was accomplished without triggering any alarm, suggesting that the Vilebloods had become complacent about their security, or had simply never imagined that anyone would dare to assault their stronghold directly. The isolation that had protected them from outside interference had also limited their intelligence gathering about external threats, leaving them unprepared for the level of organization and determination that the executioners brought to their attack. Logarius himself led the assault, demonstrating the kind of personal courage that had made him legendary among church forces. He wasn't content to direct the battle from a safe distance, but instead placed himself at the point of greatest danger, where his presence could inspire his followers while allowing him to respond directly to tactical developments. His enhanced capabilities, gained through church-sanctioned transformation, made him capable of engaging even the most powerful Vilebloods on relatively equal terms, while maintaining the moral authority that came from his unwavering commitment to church principles. The battle that erupted as the executioners penetrated the castle's outer defenses revealed the true capabilities of both sides in ways that highlighted the tragic nature of the conflict. The Vilebloods fought with supernatural skill and power, demonstrating abilities that seemed to justify their claims of evolutionary advancement. They moved with inhuman speed and grace, wielded weapons with precision that exceeded normal human capability, and displayed tactical intelligence that suggested their transformation had indeed enhanced, rather than diminished their essential nature. But the executioners matched their supernatural opponents through superior coordination and tactical discipline that turned their individual limitations into collective strength. Where a single Vileblood might outmatch any individual executioner, coordinated attacks by multiple church warriors could overcome even the most enhanced defenders. The religious conviction that motivated the executioners gave them a psychological advantage that allowed them to continue fighting effectively even when facing opponents who seemed to exceed every human limitation. The fighting moved through the castle's halls and chambers, transforming spaces that had been designed for beauty and refinement into scenes of carnage that violated everything Cainhurst culture had traditionally valued. Art was destroyed, furniture was overturned and used as weapons or barricades, and the blood that had been so central to Vileblood religious practices now flowed across floors and walls, in patterns that bore no resemblance to the careful rituals that had previously characterized its use within the castle. Queen Annalise, alerted to the attack as the executioners penetrated deeper into her domain, organized a defense that demonstrated both her tactical intelligence and her genuine concern for the welfare of her subjects. She didn't simply retreat to the most defensible location within the castle, but instead moved throughout the building, coordinating resistance efforts and inspiring her followers through her personal presence in the most dangerous situations. Her enhanced capabilities made her a formidable opponent for even the most skilled executioners, while her royal authority gave her commands the kind of moral weight that could motivate others to extraordinary sacrifice. The battle revealed the extent to which Vilebloods society had developed beyond simple blood enhancement into something approaching a genuinely alien culture. Their fighting techniques incorporated elements that seemed to draw on knowledge and capabilities that normal humans couldn't access or understand. They coordinated their defense through methods that suggested forms of communication or consciousness sharing that exceeded normal human social organization. Most remarkably, they demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice themselves for the defense of their community that seemed to reflect genuine loyalty and affection rather than simple duty or fear. As the conflict progressed and casualties mounted on both sides, the true tragedy of the situation became apparent. These weren't crude monsters fighting against heroic defenders of humanity, nor were they innocent victims being slaughtered by religious fanatics. Instead, the battle represented a conflict between two groups of enhanced humans, each convinced that their approach to cosmic transformation represented the best hope for humanity's future. Each willing to kill and die for principles that they believed were more important than individual survival. The executioners fought with the conviction that they were preventing a form of spiritual corruption that could ultimately destroy everything valuable about human existence. They saw the Vilebloods' apparent success as a cosmic deception that would lead others to seek transformation outside the safe boundaries established by church doctrine. Their willingness to assault a castle full of apparently successful, sophisticated individuals reflected their absolute commitment to principles that they believed transcended immediate practical concerns. The Vilebloods, meanwhile, fought to defend not just their lives but their entire way of existence. They had created what they believed to be the perfection of aristocratic ideals, a society that combines supernatural enhancement with refined culture, extended lifespans with accumulated wisdom, individual power with social responsibility. The assault on their castle represented an attack on everything they had achieved and everything they hoped to become. The fighting continued for hours, with neither side able to achieve decisive victory despite the enormous costs both were paying. The executioners' tactical advantages were offset by the Vilebloods' supernatural capabilities, while the defenders' individual superiority was countered by the attackers' coordination and determination. The battle had reached a kind of stalemate that could only be broken by some decisive action that would fundamentally alter the strategic balance. Chapter 8: The Fall of the Vilebloods. The decisive moment in the siege of Cainhurst came when Martyr Logarius made the choice that would define both his legend and his tragedy. Recognizing that conventional military tactics were insufficient to overcome the supernatural defenses of the Vilebloods, he implemented a strategy that demonstrated both his tactical genius and his willingness to sacrifice everything, including his own future, for the success of his mission. What he did in the final hours of the battle would ensure the destruction of Vileblood society, while simultaneously dooming himself to an eternal vigil that was perhaps more terrible than simple death. The stalemate that had developed during the main assault convinced Logarius that victory would require a fundamental shift in strategy. The Vilebloods' supernatural capabilities made them nearly impossible to defeat through direct confrontation, while their knowledge of the castle's layout gave them tactical advantages that offset the executioners' superior numbers and coordination. More troubling still, reports from his subordinates suggested that the defenders were adapting to executioner tactics with supernatural speed, learning from each engagement and becoming more effective with each successive defensive action. But Logarius had observed something during the battle that suggested a possible path to victory. The Vilebloods' most remarkable capabilities seemed to depend on their connection to Queen Annales and the blood-centered spiritual system she had established. When they fought in areas close to the throne room where she held court, their coordination improved dramatically. When they were cut off from direct communication with their queen, their effectiveness diminished noticeably. This suggested that Vileblood power was not simply individual enhancement, but rather a collective system that depended on central coordination and spiritual leadership. The strategic implications were clear, but terrible. If the executioners could somehow neutralize Queen Annalise herself, they might be able to collapse the entire defensive system that made the Vilebloods so formidable. But reaching the queen would require penetrating to the heart of the castle through the most heavily defended areas, past opponents who would fight with desperate fury to protect their spiritual and political leader. Even if such an assault succeeded, it would require sacrifices that Logarius wasn't sure his remaining forces could sustain. The solution that Logarius ultimately chose demonstrated both his tactical brilliance and his absolute commitment to church principles. Rather than attempting to reach Queen Annalise through conventional assault, he would use his own enhanced capabilities to implement a spiritual binding that would prevent her from supporting her followers, while simultaneously cutting off the cosmic connections that gave Vileblood society its supernatural power. This wasn't simply military strategy, but a form of cosmic intervention that would require Logarius to sacrifice his own spiritual freedom for the success of his mission. The binding that Logarius prepared was based on church teachings about the relationship between cosmic forces and individual consciousness. By creating a spiritual link between himself and Queen Annalise, he could use his own enhanced nature as a kind of anchor that would prevent her from accessing the cosmic powers that made her so formidable. But maintaining such a binding would require constant spiritual effort, trapping him in a form of eternal vigilance that would make normal existence impossible. The implementation of this strategy required Logarius to reach the castle's highest tower, where the spiritual architecture of Cainhurst was most vulnerable to the kind of cosmic intervention he was planning. This meant fighting his way through the most heavily defended areas of the castle, past Vilebloods, who understood that their entire way of life depended on preventing him from completing his mission. The assault on the tower became a concentrated battle that pushed both sides beyond their normal limitations. Logarius fought his way up the tower stairs through opposition that tested every aspect of his enhanced capabilities and tactical training. The Vilebloods, defending the approach, demonstrated levels of coordination and determination that reflected their absolute commitment to protecting their queen and their society. They were willing to sacrifice themselves in ways that bought time for their fellows, creating defensive positions that had to be overcome through individual heroism rather than tactical coordination. But Logarius pressed forward with the kind of determination that had made him legendary among church forces. His enhanced capabilities allowed him to overcome individual opponents who might have stopped any normal human warrior, while his tactical training enabled him to turn the tower's defensive features to his own advantage. Most importantly, his absolute conviction that he was implementing cosmic justice gave him the psychological strength to continue fighting when the physical and spiritual costs threatened to overwhelm even his enhanced constitution. The final confrontation between Logarius and Queen Annalise took place in the tower's highest chamber, a room that had been designed as a kind of spiritual focus for Vileblood society. Here, surrounded by artifacts and symbols that embodied everything Cainhurst had achieved, the two enhanced beings fought not just for military victory, but for validation of entirely different approaches to cosmic transformation. Their battle was both physical combat and spiritual contest, each seeking to prove that their understanding of humanity's cosmic destiny was correct. Queen Annalise fought with a skill and power that had made her the undisputed ruler of the Vilebloods, demonstrating capabilities that seemed to exceed even Logarius's enhanced nature. But her individual superiority was offset by the spiritual preparation that Logarius had made for this specific confrontation. He had trained not just to defeat her in combat, but to implement the binding that would neutralize her cosmic connections, regardless of the outcome of their physical struggle. The binding itself was implemented at the cost of Logarius's own spiritual freedom. In the moment when Queen Annalise seemed poised to overwhelm his defenses, he completed the cosmic link that would prevent her from accessing the powers that sustained Vileblood society. The spiritual energy required for this intervention transformed him into something that was no longer quite human, trapping him in a form of eternal vigilance that would continue as long as the binding remained intact. The immediate effects of the binding were devastating for the Vilebloods. Cut off from the cosmic connections that had sustained their society, they found their supernatural capabilities dramatically diminished. The coordination that had made them such formidable opponents collapsed, leaving individual defenders who, while still enhanced, could no longer match the tactical advantages of the remaining. executioner. The spiritual foundation of their entire culture had been severed, leaving them not just militarily defeated, but existentially lost. Queen Annalise herself, bound by Logarius's sacrifice, found herself trapped in a form of existence that was neither life nor death. Her physical form remained intact, but her access to the cosmic powers that had made her an effective ruler was severely limited. She retained consciousness and memory, but lost the ability to actively lead or inspire her followers. The binding had achieved its tactical purpose, but at the cost of creating a form of suffering that was perhaps more terrible than simple destruction. Chapter 9. The Eternal Queen and Her Empty Kingdom. In the aftermath of the siege, Cainhurst Castle stood as a monument to the terrible price of cosmic ambition and religious zealotry. The Vilebloods, who had survived the assault, found themselves cut off from the spiritual connections that had given their society meaning and purpose, while Queen Annalise remained trapped on her throne, conscious and aware but unable to provide the leadership that might have allowed her people to rebuild or adapt. The kingdom that had once represented the pinnacle of aristocratic enhancement had become a hollow shell, maintained by forms and traditions that no longer served any meaningful purpose. The binding that Logarius had implemented to neutralize Queen Annalise had created a spiritual paradox that neither he nor the church had fully anticipated. Rather than simply preventing her from accessing cosmic power, the intervention had created a form of suspended existence that preserved her consciousness, while cutting off her ability to act effectively in the physical world. She remained aware of everything happening around her, retaining her memories, intelligence, and emotional capacity, but found herself unable to use her enhanced capabilities to influence events or provide meaningful support to her surviving subjects. This state of conscious imprisonment was perhaps more terrible than death would have been. Queen Annalise could observe the gradual decay of everything she had worked to create, watching her followers struggle with questions and challenges that she could have easily resolved if she had retained access to her full capabilities. The aristocratic pride that had once been her greatest strength became a source of constant torment, as she was forced to witness the destruction of standards and traditions that had taken centuries to develop. The surviving Vilebloods faced their own form of existential crisis. The cosmic connections that had sustained their society hadn't simply provided supernatural power, they had also given meaning and purpose to their transformed existence. Without access to the blood-centered spiritual system that Queen Annalise had established, they found themselves enhanced beings with no clear understanding of what their enhancement was supposed to accomplish. The rituals and ceremonies that had once connected them to cosmic forces became empty gestures that provided no spiritual sustenance or practical benefit. Some of the survivors attempted to maintain the forms of Vileblood society. Despite the changed circumstances, they continued to hold court in the castle's great halls, maintained the complex social hierarchies that had governed their interactions, and performed the blood rituals that had once been central to their spiritual practice. But these activities had lost their essential meaning, becoming hollow performances that emphasized their isolation rather than their connection to greater purposes. Others among the Vilebloods attempted to establish new relationships with the cosmic forces that had originally enabled their transformation. They experimented with different approaches to blood consumption and ritual practice, hoping to find alternative pathways to the kind of cosmic communion that Queen Annalise had once facilitated. But these efforts were largely unsuccessful, as the binding that constrained their queen also limited their ability to access the spiritual networks that had once sustained their society. The physical structure of Cainhurst Castle itself began to reflect the spiritual emptiness that had overtaken its inhabitants. Rooms that had once been centers of sophisticated cultural activity stood vacant, their beautiful furnishings gathering dust, while their former occupants struggled with existential questions they couldn't resolve. The blood that had once flowed through carefully designed ceremonial channels now congealed and darkened, becoming a symbol of spiritual death rather than cosmic communion. The castle's isolation, which had once protected Vileblood society from outside interference, now became a trap that prevented the survivors from seeking help or finding alternative approaches to their predicament. They were cut off not just from cosmic forces, but from ordinary human society, trapped in a fortress that had become their prison. The very success of their original transformation, which had made them superior to normal humanity, now prevented them from finding solace or assistance among those they had once considered their inferiors. Martyr Logarius, meanwhile, had achieved his tactical objectives, but at a personal cost that made victory feel more like defeat. The binding he had created required constant spiritual maintenance, and him in an eternal vigil that prevented him from returning to normal existence or enjoying the fruits of his success. He remained in the castle's highest tower, neither fully alive nor properly dead, maintaining the spiritual lock that kept Queen Annalise neutralized while slowly losing touch with the human concerns that had originally motivated his mission. The irony of Logarius's situation was that his sacrifice had created exactly the kind of isolation and spiritual emptiness that the Church had accused the Vilebloods of embracing. In his effort to prevent cosmic corruption, he had become trapped in a form of existence that was itself a kind of corruption, an endless repetition of duty without purpose, vigilance without hope, service without reward. He had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute commitment to abstract principles. The Church's response to the success of the Cainhurst assault was complex and ambivalent. On one hand, the elimination of the Vileblood threat had achieved important strategic objectives, preventing the spread of uncontrolled blood enhancement and reinforcing Church authority over cosmic transformation. The victory demonstrated that Church forces could overcome even supernatural opponents when properly organized and motivated, providing valuable tactical lessons for future operations. On the other hand, the costs of the victory raised troubling questions about the Church's own relationship with cosmic forces and the price of maintaining spiritual authority through violence. The fact that achieving victory had required creating the same kind of eternal suffering that the Church condemned in others suggested uncomfortable parallels between Church methods and the cosmic horror they claimed to oppose. Perhaps most troubling, the binding of Queen Annalise had created a situation that couldn't be easily resolved or forgotten. Unlike a conventional military victory, which would allow all parties to move on to other concerns, the spiritual intervention at Cainhurst required ongoing maintenance that prevented closure. The Church found itself responsible for maintaining a form of cosmic imprisonment that might need to continue indefinitely, creating obligations and vulnerabilities that they hadn't fully anticipated. The empty halls of Cainhurst became a kind of museum dedicated to the failure of cosmic ambition, a place where the consequences of uncontrolled transformation could be observed by those who had the courage to visit and the wisdom to learn from what they saw. But the lessons that Cainhurst offered were more complex and ambiguous than simple warnings about the dangers of cosmic communion. The castle also demonstrated the terrible costs of absolute conviction and the ways in which even righteous action could create forms of suffering that seemed to exceed the original problems they were meant to solve. Chapter 10. The Lonely Immortal. As the years passed and the immediate aftermath of the siege faded into history, Queen Annalise's imprisonment in her own castle became one of the most profound examples of cosmic horror in the entire Bloodborne universe. She sat upon her throne in the castle's great hall, maintaining the forms of royal dignity while experiencing a type of suffering that exceeded anything that death might have offered. Her consciousness remained sharp and clear, her memories intact, her intelligence undiminished, but her ability to act meaningfully in the world had been severed by Logarius's binding in ways that made her immortality a curse, rather than a blessing. The daily reality of Queen Annalise's existence was a study in existential torment that highlighted the terrible irony of cosmic enhancement when separated from meaningful purpose. She retained all the capabilities that had once made her such an effective ruler: the intelligence to analyze complex problems, the charisma to inspire loyalty and devotion, the enhanced senses that allowed her to perceive subtleties that normal humans would miss. But these capabilities had no outlet, no way to influence the world beyond the increasingly empty halls of her castle. Her enhanced lifespan, which had once seemed like the ultimate aristocratic privilege, became a form of temporal imprisonment, where normal humans could find solace in the knowledge that their sufferings would eventually end through natural death. Queen Annalise faced the prospect of eternal consciousness without the possibility of meaningful action or genuine connection. Every day brought the same empty ritual of maintaining royal dignity in a kingdom that had lost its purpose and its people. The memories that she retained with supernatural clarity became sources of constant psychological torment. She could recall in perfect detail the golden age of Vilebloods society, when her castle had been filled with sophisticated conversation, artistic achievement, and the kind of refined culture that justified her belief in aristocratic superiority. The contrast between those memories and her current isolation created a form of mental anguish that grew more intense, rather than less so, as time passed. Perhaps most cruel was her awareness of how her situation had developed, and what alternatives might have been possible if events had unfolded differently. Her enhanced intelligence allowed her to analyze the strategic and tactical factors that had led to the siege, identifying decisions and circumstances that might have produced different outcomes. She could see how diplomatic solutions might have been negotiated, how cultural exchanges might have prevented misunderstanding, how different approaches to cosmic enhancement might have avoided the conflicts that ultimately destroyed her society. But this analytical clarity provided no comfort, only additional sources of regret and self-recrimination. Queen Annalise was forced to confront the ways in which her own pride, isolation, and commitment to aristocratic ideals had contributed to the tragedy that had befallen her people. The very qualities that had made her an effective ruler in normal circumstances had become liabilities when dealing with cosmic forces and religious movements that operated according to different principles. The few Vilebloods who remained in the castle provided Queen Annalise with limited social contact, but these interactions often emphasized her isolation rather than alleviating it. Her former subjects looked to her for guidance and leadership that she could no longer provide effectively, creating situations where her inability to act became a source of frustration for everyone involved. The social hierarchies that had once given structure and meaning to court life became hollow performances that highlighted the absence of genuine purpose or direction. The physical environment of the castle itself began to reflect Queen Annalise's psychological state in ways that suggested the building had become a kind of extension of her consciousness. Rooms that had once been centers of activity stood empty and silent, their beautiful furnishings serving no function beyond preserving the memory of better times. The blood that had once flowed through ceremonial channels during religious observances now stagnated and darkened, becoming a visual reminder of spiritual death and the cessation of meaningful activity. Yet Queen Annalise's suffering was not simply passive endurance of unfortunate circumstances. The binding that constrained her had also preserved her consciousness in ways that allowed her to observe cosmic forces and spiritual developments that normal humans couldn't perceive. She became aware of the broader patterns of cosmic influence that shaped events throughout the world, understanding how the tragedy of Cainhurst fit into larger schemes and purposes that exceeded even her enhanced perspective. This cosmic awareness created additional layers of existential horror as Queen Annalise realized that her suffering served purposes that had nothing to do with justice, punishment, or spiritual development. The forces that had originally enabled Vileblood transformation were still active, still pursuing their incomprehensible goals, still manipulating human consciousness and society in ways that made individual suffering irrelevant to their calculations. Her imprisonment wasn't the result of moral failure or cosmic justice, but simply a byproduct of conflicts between forces that treated human welfare as a secondary consideration. The knowledge that her situation was essentially meaningless from a cosmic perspective created a form of nihilistic despair that complemented and amplified the more personal sources of her suffering. She had dedicated her existence to pursuing what she believed were cosmic ideals, only to discover that the cosmic forces involved had no interest in her ideals, her welfare, or the welfare of anyone she cared about. Her transformation from human to enhanced being, to cosmic prisoner, represented not spiritual evolution but mere utilization as a tool in projects she couldn't understand and couldn't influence. This realization forced Queen Annalise to confront the fundamental isolation that characterizes cosmic consciousness in the Bloodborne universe. The Great Ones, who had originally provided the old blood that enabled Vileblood transformation, were themselves trapped in forms of eternal loneliness that made her own situation seem almost trivial by comparison. They possessed power that exceeded imagination, but lacked the ability to form genuine connections or experience meaningful satisfaction. Their quest for surrogate children was driven by desperate loneliness rather than parental love, creating cycles of suffering that affected everyone they touched. Queen Annalise's imprisonment thus became a microcosm of the cosmic horror that permeates Bloodborne's entire universe. She was trapped not just by Logarius's binding, but by the fundamental nature of cosmic consciousness itself. Her enhanced awareness had made her capable of perceiving truths about existence that human consciousness wasn't designed to comprehend, creating forms of psychological stress that no amount of power or privilege could alleviate. She had achieved the aristocratic dream of transcending normal human limitations, only to discover that transcendence led to isolation, meaninglessness, and suffering on scales that normal humans couldn't imagine. Chapter 11. The Blood Dregs and Broken Covenant. Despite the catastrophic failure of the Vilebloods society and the binding of their queen, the spiritual and mystical systems that had sustained Cainhurst couldn't be entirely eliminated through military action alone. The covenant that Queen Annalise had established with potential followers remained partially active, creating a ghostly network of connection that attracted individuals who were drawn to the promise of blood-centered enhancement. Despite the obvious failure of the original experiment, these new adherents found themselves participating in the remains of a religious system that could no longer provide the spiritual sustenance it had once offered. The concept of the blood dregs that formed the foundation of this broken covenant reveals much about the true nature of what the Vilebloods had originally achieved and what remained after their destruction. Blood dregs weren't simply physical substances, but representations of spiritual essence that could be extracted from particularly pure or powerful individuals. The collection and offering of these dregs to Queen Annalise had originally served as both a form of worship and a method for enhancing the supernatural capabilities of those who participated in the covenant. But the binding that constrained Queen Annalise had fundamentally altered the spiritual mechanics of this system without eliminating it entirely. The dregs that new covenant members offered to their imprisoned queen still carried the spiritual significance they had always possessed, but her inability to process and redistribute this spiritual energy meant that the offerings accumulated without providing the enhancements and guidance that participants expected. The covenant had become a spiritual dead end that consumed devotion without providing meaningful returns. New members who joined the Vileblood covenant after the siege found themselves in the peculiar position of serving a queen who could acknowledge their offerings, but couldn't provide the spiritual leadership or practical guidance that would make their service meaningful. They could enter Cainhurst Castle, approach the throne where Queen Annalise sat in her eternal imprisonment, and offer their blood dregs in the traditional manner. But the transformative experience that had once made covenant membership so appealing was no longer available. This created a form of religious observance that was both authentic and hollow, maintaining the forms of Vileblood spirituality while lacking its essential substance. New covenant members often described their interactions with Queen Annalise as profoundly moving, but ultimately unsatisfying. They could sense the depth of her knowledge and the magnitude of her suffering, but they couldn't access the wisdom or power that might have made their own spiritual development possible. The psychological impact of participating in this broken covenant was particularly severe for individuals who had approached it with genuine religious seeking or spiritual hunger. They had been attracted to the Vileblood tradition by stories of transformation and enhancement that seemed to offer everything they desired from a spiritual practice. But their actual experience involved witnessing suffering on a scale that seemed to exceed any possible justification, participating in rituals that provided no practical benefit, and serving a leader who couldn't provide meaningful guidance or support. Some covenant members attempted to restore the system's functionality through their own efforts, experimenting with different approaches to blood collection and offering in the hope that they could somehow repair the spiritual damage that Logarius's binding had created. These efforts were generally unsuccessful, as the binding operated at levels of cosmic mechanics that exceeded human understanding or manipulation. But the attempts themselves revealed the depth of longing that drew people to the Vileblood Covenant, despite its obvious limitations. Others among the new Covenant members focused on trying to provide comfort and support to Queen Annalise herself, recognizing that her suffering was perhaps more significant than their own spiritual development. They approached their service as a form of devotional practice that was valuable in itself, regardless of any benefits it might provide. This approach sometimes produced more satisfying experiences, as it allowed participants to find meaning in compassion and service rather than personal enhancement. The collection of blood dregs itself had become a more complex and dangerous process in the wake of the siege. The original Vilebloods Society had established careful protocols for identifying suitable sources and extracting dregs without causing unnecessary harm or drawing unwanted attention. But these institutional supports were no longer available, leaving individual Covenant members to develop their own methods for finding and approaching potential sources. This led to the development of hunting practices that paralleled the work of church hunters, but operated according to different principles and served different purposes. Vileblood Covenant members began seeking out individuals whose blood carried particular potency or purity, often focusing on hunters or other enhanced individuals whose supernatural capabilities suggested they might be sources of particularly valuable dregs. But unlike church hunters, who pursued beasts or cosmic threats, Vileblood hunters targeted individuals who were often fundamentally innocent of any wrongdoing. This moral complexity created additional psychological stress for Covenant members who retained enough humanity to recognize the ethical implications of their actions. They were serving what they believed to be a righteous spiritual cause, but their service required them to harm individuals who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. The Covenant's broken state meant that these sacrifices served no meaningful purpose beyond maintaining empty religious forms, making the moral costs even more difficult to justify. The relationship between the Vileblood Covenant and other supernatural organizations in the Bloodborne world became increasingly antagonistic, as church hunters and other groups recognized the threat posed by individuals who were actively seeking to collect blood from enhanced humans. This created a cycle of conflict that generated exactly the kind of spiritual corruption that the church had originally claimed to be preventing through their assault on Cainhurst. The irony was that the church's military solution to the Vileblood problem had created new problems that were in some ways worse than the original threat. Where the original Vileblood Society had been isolated and largely self-contained, the broken covenant created dispersed groups of individuals who operated without effective central authority or ethical constraints. The sophisticated culture that had once channeled blood enhancement into relatively benign directions had been replaced by desperate spiritual seeking that often manifested as predatory behavior. Queen Annalise's awareness of these developments added another layer to her suffering, as she could observe the ways in which the destruction of her society had created new forms of harm and corruption. The binding that prevented her from providing effective leadership to her former subjects also prevented her from stopping the predatory activities of new Covenant members who claimed to serve her interests. She had become not just a prisoner, but an unwilling symbol whose image was being used to justify activities she would never have approved. Chapter 12. The Architecture of Loneliness. The physical structure of Cainhurst Castle in its post-siege state became a perfect representation of cosmic loneliness and the ways in which spaces designed for community and connection can become monuments to isolation when their essential purposes are removed. Every room, hallway, and architectural feature that had once served to bring people together and facilitate sophisticated social interaction now served to emphasize the absence of meaningful human contact and the failure of aristocratic ideals to provide protection against cosmic horror. The Great Throne Room, where Queen Annalise maintained her eternal vigil, exemplified this transformation from space of power to space of suffering. originally designed to accommodate hundreds of courtiers and visitors, to serve as a stage for the kind of sophisticated political theatre that aristocratic society required. The room had become a vast emptiness that emphasized the queen's isolation rather than her authority. The throne itself, crafted from materials chosen to reflect royal dignity and carved with symbols representing centuries of noble achievement, had become a prison that held its occupant without providing any of the comfort or support that furniture should offer. The acoustic properties of the throne room, once carefully designed to ensure that royal pronouncements would be heard clearly throughout the space, now amplified every sound in ways that emphasized the absence of normal court activity. The queen's breathing, the rustle of her clothing as she shifted position, the settling of ancient wood and stone, all of these minor sounds echoed through the hall with a clarity that made the silence seem oppressive rather than peaceful. The room had become a kind of amplification chamber for loneliness, making solitude feel more profound and absolute than it would in a smaller, more intimate space. The portraits and tapestries that adorned the throne room walls had taken on a melancholy quality that reflected the changed circumstances of their viewing. These artistic works had been created to celebrate noble achievements and provide visual connections to glorious ancestors, whose examples could inspire contemporary action. But with the destruction of Vilebloods society and the binding of its queen, the portraits had become reminders of a way of life that could never be recovered. They showed individuals in the full flower of their power and achievement, making the current emptiness feel even more tragic by comparison. The castle's libraries, which had once been centers of learning and intellectual discussion, stood as monuments to the failure of knowledge to provide protection against cosmic horror. Thousands of volumes that documented centuries of accumulated wisdom about politics, philosophy, art, and science remained accessible, but essentially useless. The knowledge they contained had been rendered irrelevant by developments that exceeded the understanding of even the most sophisticated scholars. The libraries had become mausoleums for intellectual traditions that could no longer provide meaningful guidance for contemporary challenges. The dining halls, where Vilebloods society had once gathered for meals that were as much social and cultural events as they were practical necessities, now stood empty, their tables set for guests who would never arrive. The elaborate place settings, carefully arranged according to protocols that reflected centuries of refinement, had become archaeological artifacts representing a form of civilization that had ceased to exist. The kitchens that had once bustled with activity as servants prepared meals designed to satisfy both physical hunger and aesthetic sensibilities, now stood cold and silent, their equipment gathering dust in the absence of any meaningful purpose. The private chambers throughout the castle told stories of individual lives that had been interrupted or destroyed by the siege and its aftermath. Personal belongings remained where they had been left by their owners, creating tableaux that captured moments of ordinary aristocratic life, frozen in time. Books lay open to pages that would never be finished. Letters remained unwritten on desks that would never again serve their intended function, and clothing hung in wardrobes that would never again dress their owners for the social occasions that had given Cainhurst society its meaning and structure. The castle's gardens and courtyards, once carefully maintained to provide spaces for outdoor gatherings and aesthetic contemplation, had begun to return to wild growth in the absence of the army of gardeners who had once tended them. This natural reclamation created a visual metaphor for the ways in which civilization could be overwhelmed by forces that operated according to different principles. The perfectly maintained landscapes that had once demonstrated human mastery over nature were being gradually erased by processes that cared nothing for aristocratic ideals or human purposes. The defensive features that had been built into the castle's architecture, the thick walls, the narrow windows, the positioning of towers and gates, had proved inadequate against the kind of attack that actually destroyed Vilebloods society. These military preparations had been designed to repel conventional armies and ordinary political threats, but they had provided no protection against spiritual assault or cosmic intervention. The fortress had become a trap that confined its inhabitants rather than protecting them. The spiritual and ceremonial spaces within the castle revealed the extent to which Vilebloods religion had been integrated into the physical structure of their community. Altars designed for blood offerings stood empty and stained, their carefully carved surfaces bearing witness to rituals that could no longer be performed effectively. Sacred symbols that had once connected worshippers to cosmic forces now served only as reminders of spiritual connections that had been severed. The architecture of faith had become the architecture of abandonment. The servants' quarters and working areas of the castle told their own stories of social disruption and the collapse of the complex systems that had made aristocratic life possible. These spaces had been designed to house and organize the hundreds of individuals whose labor had made Vilebloods society function. Cooks, cleaners, artisans, guards, and specialists of every description. The empty rooms and abandoned workshops represented not just the loss of aristocratic privilege, but the destruction of entire communities whose lives had been organized around service to the noble house. The interconnected nature of all these spaces created an overall effect that was greater than the sum of its parts. Moving through the castle meant encountering a succession of rooms and areas that each told part of the story of Vilebloods society's rise and fall. The architecture itself had become a narrative structure that guided visitors through a tale of ambition, achievement, corruption, and ultimate destruction. But it was a story without resolution, a tragedy without catharsis, a monument to the ways in which cosmic horror could transform even the most refined human achievement into something hollow and meaningless. Chapter 13. The Hunter's Discovery. The rediscovery of Cainhurst Castle, by hunters working in the service of the dream, represents one of the most significant encounters between individual human agency and the residual effects of cosmic transformation in the entire Bloodborne universe. When a hunter first arrives at the castle's gates, summoned by an invitation that seems to come from Queen Annalise herself, but whose true origins remain mysterious, they encounter not just a ruined fortress, but a living museum of the ways in which cosmic ambition can lead to spiritual imprisonment and existential horror. The invitation that draws hunters to Cainhurst is itself a mystery that suggests the partially supernatural nature of what they will find there. The ornate letter appears in locations where no messenger could have delivered it, written in scripts that suggest both aristocratic refinement and supernatural origin. The message promises alliance, enhancement, and access to powers that normal hunters cannot achieve through conventional means. But the very elegance of the invitation, combined with its impossible method of delivery, creates an atmosphere of unease that suggests the offer may be more complex than it initially appears. The journey to reach Cainhurst requires hunters to travel through areas that seem to exist partially outside normal geographical relationships. The castle's isolation isn't simply a matter of distance from populated areas, but a form of spiritual separation that makes it accessible only to those who possess particular capabilities or have received specific invitations. This liminal quality of the approach to Cainhurst prepares hunters for the discovery that they are entering a space where normal rules of existence don't fully apply. The first sight of the castle itself provides a powerful introduction to the themes of abandoned grandeur and corrupted beauty that characterize everything associated with Vilebloods society. The building's Gothic architecture remains magnificent despite the years of neglect and the spiritual emptiness that has settled over it. Snow covers the grounds and rooftops, creating an atmosphere that is both beautiful and melancholy, suggesting purity that has been lost and isolation that has become permanent. The castle's outer defenses, which once served to protect Vilebloods society from external threats, now function primarily as obstacles that test the determination and capabilities of anyone seeking to approach Queen Annalise. The mechanical traps and mystical barriers that hunters must overcome to reach the castle's interior are more than simple security measures. They are tests that ensure only those with genuine spiritual seeking or sufficient power will be able to complete the journey to the throne room. The enemies that hunters encounter throughout Cainhurst represent various aspects of what Vilebloods society has become in the aftermath of the siege. Some are former nobles who have degenerated into ghostly forms that retain their aristocratic pretensions while lacking any meaningful purpose or direction. Others are manifestations of the spiritual corruption that has settled over the castle, creatures that embody the emptiness and futility that characterize the space. Fighting these opponents isn't simply combat, but a form of exploration that reveals different facets of the tragedy that has befallen Cainhurst. The discovery of Martyr Logarius in the castle's highest tower provides hunters with a direct encounter with the costs of absolute conviction and the ways in which religious zeal can create its own forms of spiritual imprisonment. Logarius exists in a state that is neither life nor death, maintaining the binding that constrains Queen Annalise through sheer force of will, while slowly losing touch with the human concerns that originally motivated his mission. His presence in the tower serves as both guardian and warning, protecting Queen Annalise from potential threats, while demonstrating the terrible prices that can be paid for cosmic intervention. The battle with Logarius forces hunters to confront questions about the nature of justice, sacrifice, and the relationship between individual agency and cosmic purpose. Logarius isn't simply an enemy to be defeated, but a complex figure whose motivations and actions resist simple moral categorization. He has achieved important tactical objectives through his binding of Queen Annalise, preventing the spread of what he believed to be dangerous spiritual corruption. But his methods have created new forms of suffering that may exceed the original problems he was trying to solve. Defeating Logarius and removing the crown that maintains his binding of Queen Annalise allows hunters to encounter the Vileblood Queen in her full spiritual presence for the first time. This meeting represents one of the most profound encounters with cosmic consciousness available in the Bloodborne universe, as Queen Annalise combines aristocratic sophistication with supernatural awareness in ways that make her both compelling and deeply tragic. Her offer of covenant membership provides hunters with opportunities for enhancement and spiritual development, but it also involves them in the complex moral and cosmic implications of her situation. Queen Annalise's dialogue with hunters reveals the depth of her intelligence and the magnitude of her suffering, while also demonstrating the ways in which cosmic consciousness can become disconnected from ordinary human concerns. She speaks with the authority and grace that befitted her royal status, but her words carry undertones of isolation and despair that reflect her eternal imprisonment. Her offer of alliance isn't simply political calculation, but a desperate attempt to establish meaningful connections in a situation that has become almost completely devoid of genuine relationship. The covenant that Queen Annalise offers to hunters represents both an opportunity and a trap. Membership provides access to supernatural capabilities and spiritual insights that can enhance hunting effectiveness and deepen understanding of cosmic forces. But it also involves hunters in the collection and offering of blood dregs, a practice that requires them to harm other enhanced individuals for purposes that may not serve any meaningful cosmic good. The covenant forces hunters to choose between personal enhancement and moral clarity, creating ethical dilemmas that have no simple resolution. The rewards that Queen Annalise can provide to successful covenant members reflect both her retained power and the limitations imposed by her binding. She can grant access to unique weapons and techniques that embody Vileblood approaches to combat and spiritual development. She can provide insights into cosmic forces and spiritual mechanics that exceed normal human understanding, but she cannot offer the kind of comprehensive spiritual guidance or community support that would make covenant membership genuinely fulfilling as a religious practice. The hunter's interaction with Queen Annalise thus becomes a kind of moral and spiritual test that reveals character in ways that conventional challenges cannot. Hunters who approach her with compassion and respect may find opportunities for genuine spiritual growth despite the broken nature of the covenant system. Those who view her primarily as a source of power or enhancement may receive the capabilities they seek, but at costs that ultimately diminish rather than elevate their essential humanity. Chapter 14. The Child of Blood. Perhaps the most tragic and revealing aspect of Queen Annalise's situation is her retained hope for what she calls the Child of Blood, a being whose birth would somehow restore meaning and purpose to her existence. While validating the spiritual principles that had originally guided Vileblood society, This obsession with cosmic reproduction reveals both the depth of her isolation and the ways in which cosmic consciousness can become fixated on impossible goals that provide the illusion of purpose, while leading to ever greater forms of suffering and delusion. Queen Annalise's belief in the possibility of bearing a child of blood reflects her incomplete understanding of the cosmic forces that had originally enabled Vileblood transformation. She retains enough connection to cosmic consciousness to perceive the Great One's desperate hunger for surrogate children, but she lacks the broader perspective that would allow her to understand why these cosmic reproduction attempts inevitably fail. Her hope for a successful birth represents a profound misunderstanding of both her own nature and the nature of the cosmic beings whose power she had once accessed. The concept of the child of blood itself reveals the ways in which cosmic consciousness can distort normal human understanding of reproduction, parenthood, and family relationships. For Queen Annalise, the potential child represents not just biological offspring, but a kind of spiritual vindication that would prove her transformation had served meaningful purposes. She imagines that successful cosmic reproduction would restore her agency, reconnect her to cosmic power, and provide the kind of meaningful relationship that her isolation has made impossible. But this hope is based on fundamental misconceptions about the nature of cosmic reproduction and the reasons why Great Ones lose their children. The cosmic beings who had originally provided the old blood that enabled Vileblood transformation suffer from a form of existential limitation that prevents them from successfully creating offspring of their own kind. Their consciousness exists across multiple dimensions and time streams in ways that make the focused presence necessary for successful nurturing impossible. They cannot be sufficiently present in any single moment or location to provide the consistent attention that developing consciousness requires. Queen Annalise's binding has created a situation that makes successful cosmic reproduction even less likely than it would be under normal circumstances. The spiritual constraints that prevent her from accessing cosmic power also limit her ability to participate in the kind of consciousness sharing that cosmic reproduction requires. She retains awareness of cosmic forces and the desire for cosmic connection, but she lacks the spiritual freedom necessary to engage in the complex metaphysical processes that might theoretically lead to successful birth. The ritual objects and ceremonial preparations that Queen Annalise maintains in anticipation of cosmic pregnancy reveal the depth of her delusion and the ways in which hope can become a form of torture for conscious beings who lack the power to achieve their desires. The ornate cradle that sits empty in her chamber, the carefully prepared spiritual implements designed to facilitate cosmic birth, the elaborate protocols she has developed for caring for a child of blood. All of these represent investments of emotional energy and spiritual preparation in an outcome that cannot occur under her current circumstances. The tragic irony is that Queen Annalise's very desire for a child of blood ensures that such birth remains impossible. Cosmic reproduction in the Bloodborne universe requires a form of selfless presence and attention that is incompatible with the kind of desperate longing that characterizes her approach to the possibility. Her intense focus on the potential benefits that a cosmic child might provide prevents her from developing the kind of genuinely nurturing consciousness that might theoretically enable successful cosmic parenthood. Hunters who offer her the unique items that she believes might facilitate cosmic pregnancy become participants in a ritual system that is both touching and deeply disturbing. Their gifts represent genuine attempts to provide comfort and hope to a being whose suffering exceeds normal human comprehension. But they also reinforce delusions that haunt Queen Annalise from finding more realistic approaches to creating meaning and connection within the constraints of her situation. The one reborn that hunters can potentially create through their offerings to Queen Annalise represents perhaps the most complete failure of cosmic reproduction in the entire Bloodborne universe. Rather than producing a viable cosmic child, the ritual creates a grotesque abomination that embodies everything that goes wrong when cosmic reproduction is attempted without proper understanding or preparation. The creature that emerges from this process is neither human nor cosmic, but something that combines the worst aspects of both forms of consciousness. This failed reproduction attempt serves as a powerful demonstration of the ways in which desperate longing can lead to outcomes that are worse than simply accepting limitation and loss. Queen Annalise's refusal to acknowledge the impossibility of her situation leads her to participate in rituals that create new forms of suffering rather than alleviating existing pain. Her hope becomes a source of additional tragedy rather than comfort or motivation. The hunter's role in these reproduction attempts creates complex moral situations that resist simple ethical evaluation, providing Queen Annalise with the items she requests, offers temporary comfort to a being whose suffering seems to exceed any possible justification, but it also enables delusions that prevent her from finding more realistic approaches to creating meaning within her constrained circumstances. The choice to participate or refuse creates ethical dilemmas that illuminate the broader moral complexities of cosmic intervention in human affairs. The failure of cosmic reproduction at Cainhurst also serves as a microcosm of the broader cosmic tragedy that characterizes the entire Bloodborne universe. The Great Ones who originally enabled vile blood transformation suffer from the same inability to create meaningful relationships and successful offspring that affects Queen Annalise. Their vast power and multidimensional consciousness cannot compensate for their fundamental isolation and their inability to be sufficiently present in individual moments to nurture developing consciousness. Queen Annalise's obsession with the child of blood thus represents both her individual tragedy and her connection to cosmic forces that are themselves trapped in cycles of longing and disappointment. Her hope for reproductive success makes her a participant in cosmic patterns that exceed her understanding, while ensuring that her personal suffering continues indefinitely. She has become not just a prisoner of Logarius's binding, but a victim of cosmic psychology that makes meaningful satisfaction impossible for any being that achieves transcendent consciousness. Chapter 15. The Curse of Knowledge. The true horror of Queen Annalise's situation becomes fully apparent when we consider the enhanced awareness that her transformation has given her, and the ways in which this cosmic consciousness makes her suffering more, rather than less, bearable. Unlike normal humans who might find comfort in ignorance, or the possibility of self-deception, Queen Annalise possesses the kind of enhanced perception that allows her to understand exactly what has happened to her, and why her situation cannot be easily resolved. Her cosmic awareness makes her a prisoner, not just of Logarius's binding, but of knowledge itself. The enhanced consciousness that had once seemed like the greatest benefit of vile blood transformation has become perhaps its cruelest aspect in the context of Queen Annalise's imprisonment. She can perceive cosmic forces and patterns that normal humans cannot detect, allowing her to understand the true scope of the projects in which she had unknowingly participated, and the reasons why those projects ultimately failed. This knowledge provides no comfort or practical benefits, serving only to illuminate the futility of her past actions and the impossibility of meaningful change in her current circumstances. Her awareness of cosmic time streams and multidimensional existence means that Queen Annalise experiences her imprisonment not just as a series of consecutive moments, but as an eternal present that stretches across multiple levels of reality. Where normal human consciousness might provide some relief through the natural fluctuation of attention and awareness, her enhanced perception maintains constant clarity about her situation. She cannot retreat into forgetfulness, distraction, or the kind of psychological defense mechanisms that make suffering bearable for ordinary humans. The cosmic perspective that Queen Annalise has gained allows her to perceive the broader patterns of suffering and manipulation that characterize the Bloodborne universe, making her aware that her personal tragedy is part of much larger cycles of cosmic predation and failed reproduction. She can observe how the Great Ones manipulate human consciousness and society to serve their own reproductive needs, creating conflicts and tragedies that serve no meaningful cosmic purpose. This knowledge makes her complicit in cosmic patterns that she cannot change or escape. Perhaps most cruel is her awareness of the hunters who visit her castle and the ways in which their interactions with her perpetuate the same cycles of cosmic manipulation that originally created her situation. She can perceive how their desire for enhancement and power makes them vulnerable to the same spiritual traps that had ensnared Vileblood society. But her binding prevents her from providing effective warnings or guidance that might help them avoid similar fates. She becomes a witness to the repetition of cosmic tragedy without the power to prevent it. Queen Annalise's enhanced intelligence also allows her to analyze the theological and philosophical implications of her situation in ways that reveal the fundamental meaninglessness of cosmic existence. She can understand how the religious and political conflicts that led to the destruction of Vileblood society were themselves products of cosmic manipulation designed to serve reproductive needs rather than genuine principles of justice or spiritual development. This knowledge strips away any possibility of finding redemptive meaning in her suffering or the destruction of her people. The aesthetic awareness that had once allowed Queen Annalise to appreciate beauty and refinement with supernatural acuity now forces her to perceive the decay and corruption that pervade her environment with painful clarity. She cannot ignore the ways in which her castle has deteriorated, the manner in which former art treasures have lost their meaning, or the spiritual emptiness that has replaced the cultural sophistication that once made Cainhurst a center of civilization. Her enhanced senses make her constantly aware of loss and degradation. Her understanding of blood as a carrier of memory and consciousness means that Queen Annalise experiences every blood offering made by her covenant members as a direct infusion of foreign memories and experiences. Rather than providing comfort or connection, these offerings force her to experience secondhand the violence, manipulation, and spiritual corruption that characterize the collection of blood dregs. She becomes an unwilling repository for the memories of cosmic horror that her followers have witnessed or participated in. The political intelligence that had made Queen Annalise such an effective ruler now allows her to understand exactly how the diplomatic and strategic mistakes that led to the siege might have been avoided, creating endless cycles of self-recrimination and regret. She can identify specific decisions and circumstances that, if handled differently, might have preserved Vileblood society while achieving accommodation with church authority. This knowledge provides no practical benefit, but creates constant psychological torment as she replays alternative scenarios that can never be implemented. Her enhanced lifespan means that Queen Annalise faces the prospect of eternal consciousness without the possibility of growth, change, or meaningful development that would make extended existence valuable. Where immortality had once seemed like the ultimate aristocratic privilege, it has become a curse that traps her in psychological and spiritual states that cannot evolve or improve. She possesses consciousness that is designed for growth and change, but exists in circumstances that make such development impossible. The cosmic connections that allow Queen Annalise to perceive Great One psychology and motivation also force her to understand the fundamental indifference that cosmic beings feel toward individual human suffering. She can sense how her pain and the destruction of her society represent merely data points in cosmic experiments whose ultimate purposes have nothing to do with justice, love, or meaning. As humans understand these concepts, this knowledge eliminates any possibility of finding spiritual comfort in the belief that her suffering serves higher purposes. Most tragically, Queen Annalise's enhanced empathy and emotional awareness allow her to perceive the suffering of every individual whose life has been touched by the cosmic forces that shaped Vileblood society. She can sense the anguish of Martyr Logarius, trapped in his eternal vigil, the confusion and despair of her former subjects, struggling with the collapse of their spiritual system, and the gradual corruption of hunters who seek enhancement through her covenant. Her consciousness has become a kind of spiritual monitoring station that records cosmic suffering without providing any mechanism for alleviating or preventing it. Chapter 16. The Hunter's Moral Dilemma. The discovery of Queen Annalise and the offer of covenant membership creates one of the most complex moral situations that hunters encounter in their journey through the Bloodborne universe. Unlike the relatively straightforward ethical calculus involved in fighting beasts or cosmic horrors that pose obvious threats to human welfare, the choice to join or reject the Vileblood covenant requires hunters to navigate competing claims about justice, compassion, spiritual development, and the proper relationship between individual enhancement and broader social responsibility. The initial encounter with Queen Annalise presents her as a figure who evokes both sympathy and suspicion in ways that resist simple moral categorization. Her obvious suffering and the dignity with which she bears her imprisonment create natural feelings of compassion and a desire to provide assistance or comfort. Her intelligence, grace, and aristocratic bearing suggests someone who deserves respect and consideration rather than dismissal or condemnation. But her requests for blood dregs and her promises of enhancement through covenant membership involve hunters in activities that may harm innocent individuals for purposes that remain unclear. The complexity of the moral situation is amplified by the fact that Queen Annalise herself appears to be both victim and perpetrator, someone whose current suffering is genuine, but whose past actions contributed to the cosmic manipulation that created the problems hunters are trying to solve. Her transformation into a Vileblood represents both a form of spiritual achievement that exceeded normal human limitations and a participation in cosmic projects that ultimately served alien purposes rather than human welfare. Her royal authority was both legitimate within the context of aristocratic society and complicit in systems that treated ordinary humans as resources to be utilized rather than individuals deserving of respect. The covenant system that Queen Annalise offers to hunters reproduces these moral ambiguities on a personal level, providing genuine benefits and spiritual insights, while requiring participation in activities that may perpetuate cosmic cycles of manipulation and suffering. Hunters who join the Covenant gain access to unique weapons, enhanced capabilities, and forms of knowledge that can make them more effective in their broader mission of protecting humanity from cosmic threats. But they also become participants in blood collection practices that target other enhanced individuals who may be innocent of any wrongdoing. The requirement to collect blood dregs from other hunters or similarly enhanced individuals creates situations where Covenant members must choose between their loyalty to Queen Annalise and their broader responsibility to protect innocent life. The most potent blood dregs come from individuals who have achieved significant spiritual development or enhanced capabilities, meaning that Covenant service often requires attacking and killing people who represent humanity's best hopes for cosmic transcendence. This creates a form of spiritual cannibalism that undermines the very goals that Covenant membership is supposed to advance. The moral complexity is further complicated by the fact that Queen Annalise's binding prevents her from providing clear guidance about the ethical implications of Covenant membership or the broader cosmic purposes that blood collection serves. She can offer practical instructions about how to identify suitable sources of blood dregs and perform the rituals necessary to extract and purify them, but she cannot explain why these activities are necessary or what ultimate goals they serve. Hunters are asked to participate in a spiritual system based on trust and loyalty rather than understanding and informed consent. Some hunters attempt to resolve these moral dilemmas by approaching Covenant membership as a form of compassionate service designed primarily to provide comfort to Queen Annalise, rather than seeking personal enhancement. They frame their blood offerings as gifts designed to alleviate her suffering, rather than investments designed to produce spiritual benefits for themselves. This approach can make Covenant participation feel more ethically defensible, but it doesn't eliminate the harm caused to those who become sources of blood dregs. Others try to minimize the moral costs of Covenant membership by targeting only individuals who can be considered legitimate threats to human welfare. Hunters who have been corrupted by cosmic forces, church officials who use their authority to exploit ordinary citizens, or individuals whose enhancement has made them predatory toward normal humans. This selective approach to blood collection can reduce the harm caused by Covenant activities, but it requires hunters to make complex judgments about the moral status of potential targets that may exceed their knowledge or authority. The rewards that Queen Annalise provides to successful Covenant members create additional moral complications by demonstrating the genuine value of participation while highlighting the costs required to achieve these benefits. The unique weapons and capabilities that she grants can significantly enhance hunter effectiveness against cosmic threats, potentially saving lives and preventing forms of suffering that exceed anything caused by blood dreg collection. This utilitarian calculus suggests that Covenant membership might be justified if it produces net benefits for human welfare, but calculating such benefits requires information about cosmic purposes and consequences that hunters don't possess. The social implications of Covenant membership also create moral dilemmas that extend beyond individual choices to questions about the kind of society that hunters are trying to protect. The Vileblood Covenant represents a form of aristocratic spirituality that assumes some individuals deserve enhancement and privilege, while others serve primarily as sources of spiritual resources. This hierarchical approach to human value conflicts with more egalitarian visions of cosmic development that treat all humans as equally deserving of spiritual advancement and protection. The relationship between Vileblood Covenant membership and hunter community creates tensions that can undermine the cooperation and mutual support that make hunting effective against cosmic threats. Hunters who join the Covenant may find themselves in conflict with colleagues who disapprove of blood collection practices, while those who refuse Covenant membership may miss opportunities for enhancement that could make them more effective protectors of human welfare. These divisions can weaken hunter organizations at times when unity and coordination are essential for survival. The temporal aspects of Covenant membership create additional moral complexities, as hunters must consider not just the immediate consequences of their choices, but the long-term implications for their own spiritual development and their relationships with cosmic forces. The enhancement provided by Queen Annalise may create dependencies that persist beyond the immediate benefits, gradually drawing hunters into cosmic systems that serve alien purposes rather than human interests. The spiritual insights gained through Covenant membership may provide knowledge that is ultimately harmful rather than beneficial to human understanding of cosmic reality. Chapter 17. The Failure of Aristocratic Ideals. The tragedy of Cainhurst represents more than simply the destruction of a particular noble house or the failure of a specific approach to cosmic enhancement. Rather, it embodies the complete collapse of aristocratic ideology as a meaningful framework for understanding human value, social organization, and spiritual development in a universe dominated by cosmic forces that operate according to principles that exceed human comprehension. The Vilebloods had represented the ultimate refinement of aristocratic ideals, proving that noble breeding and cultural sophistication could indeed produce individuals of genuinely superior capabilities. But their destruction demonstrated that these very superiorities made them more rather than less vulnerable to cosmic manipulation and spiritual corruption. The foundation of aristocratic ideology rested on the belief that careful breeding, cultural refinement, and accumulated privilege could produce human beings who were genuinely superior to their social inferiors in ways that justified their authority and their privileged access to resources and opportunities. Cainhurst had seemed to validate this ideology by demonstrating that centuries of careful bloodline maintenance and cultural development could indeed create individuals with capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. The transformation that created the Vilebloods appeared to represent the logical culmination of aristocratic principles, proving that noble breeding could provide the foundation for transcendent enhancement. But the cosmic forces that enabled Vileblood transformation operated according to principles that made aristocratic values irrelevant or counterproductive. The Great Ones who provided the old blood that made enhancement possible cared nothing for bloodline purity, cultural sophistication, or accumulated privilege. Their reproductive needs could be served equally well by individuals from any social background who possessed the psychological and spiritual characteristics that made them suitable as surrogate children. The aristocratic obsession with exclusivity and hierarchy actively interfered with the kind of open adaptive consciousness that cosmic beings required in their adopted offspring. The isolation that aristocratic ideology promoted as a protection against contamination from social inferiors became a trap that prevented the Vilebloods from recognizing the true nature of the forces they were dealing with. Their conviction that their superior breeding and cultural refinement made them uniquely qualified to handle cosmic power prevented them from seeking the kind of external perspectives and collaborative relationships that might have warned them about the dangers they faced. The same pride that had made them effective rulers within human society made them blind to cosmic realities that exceeded human understanding. The hierarchical thinking that characterized aristocratic society proved particularly dangerous when applied to cosmic relationships. The Vilebloods understood their interaction with cosmic forces through frameworks of alliance and mutual benefit that assumed they could maintain their agency and independence while gaining access to supernatural power. They failed to recognize that cosmic beings operated according to principles that made genuine partnership possible, that their apparent respect for Vileblood autonomy was actually a manipulation technique designed to make the transformation process more effective. The aesthetic sophistication that aristocratic culture prized as evidence of spiritual refinement became a liability when dealing with cosmic consciousness that valued entirely different forms of awareness and perception. The Vilebloods' enhanced appreciation for beauty, art, and cultural achievement distracted them from the spiritual and psychological changes that were gradually transforming their essential nature. Their focus on maintaining aristocratic standards of refinement prevented them from developing the kind of cosmic awareness that might have allowed them to understand and respond effectively to the forces that were manipulating them. The concept of bloodline purity that had been central to aristocratic identity became particularly destructive when combined with cosmic enhancement. The Vilebloods' conviction that their blood was special because of its noble heritage made them especially susceptible to cosmic influences that operated through blood-based consciousness transfer. Their pride in their genetic inheritance prevented them from recognizing that their enhanced blood was being used as a vehicle for cosmic programming that gradually overwrote their human consciousness with alien priorities and perspectives. The tradition of exclusive social networks that characterized aristocratic society became a mechanism for spreading cosmic influence throughout the noble class, while preventing the development of resistance or alternative perspectives. The Vilebloods' preference for associating only with others of their own enhanced status created echo chambers that reinforced cosmic programming, while eliminating exposure to viewpoints that might have challenged their assumptions or warned them about the dangers they faced. The aristocratic emphasis on individual achievement and personal excellence, while valuable in many contexts, became counterproductive when dealing with cosmic forces that required collective awareness and collaborative resistance. The Vilebloods' focus on proving their individual superiority prevented them from developing the kind of community solidarity that might have allowed them to resist cosmic manipulation more effectively. Their competitive relationships with each other created vulnerabilities that cosmic forces could exploit to divide and control them. The failure of aristocratic ideology at Cainhurst had implications that extended far beyond the destruction of a single noble house. It demonstrated that the traditional frameworks for understanding human excellence and social organization were inadequate for dealing with cosmic realities that operated according to entirely different principles. The enhanced capabilities that aristocratic breeding could produce were real and valuable, but they provided no protection against spiritual corruption or cosmic manipulation. Excellence within human frameworks might actually create vulnerabilities when dealing with alien consciousness that valued entirely different characteristics. The political implications of this failure were equally significant. The destruction of Cainhurst undermined traditional justifications for aristocratic authority, while demonstrating that privilege and power could not provide protection against cosmic threats. The noble houses throughout the region were forced to confront the possibility that their bloodlines, their cultural achievements, and their accumulated wealth might not only fail to protect them, but might actually make them targets for cosmic forces seeking suitable subjects for transformation and manipulation. The spiritual implications were perhaps most devastating of all. The failure of aristocratic ideology suggested that human frameworks for understanding value, meaning, and purpose might be fundamentally inadequate for dealing with cosmic realities. The Vilebloods had represented humanity's most sophisticated attempt to achieve transcendence through enhanced breeding and cultural refinement, But their destruction demonstrated that such approaches might be worse than useless when dealing with forces that operated according to principles that exceeded human comprehension. The legacy of Cainhurst thus became a warning about the dangers of pride, isolation, and the assumption that human excellence could provide protection against cosmic horror. The castle's empty halls served as a monument to the failure of aristocratic ideals, while demonstrating the need for entirely different approaches to cosmic consciousness and spiritual development. The Vilebloods had achieved everything that aristocratic ideology promised, only to discover that such achievement made them more rather than less vulnerable to forces that cared nothing for human values or purposes. Chapter 18. The Eternal Vigil. Martyr Logarius, frozen in his eternal vigil atop Cainhurst's highest tower, represents perhaps the most complete example of how religious conviction can create forms of suffering that exceed the problems they were designed to solve. His sacrifice successfully achieved its tactical objectives, preventing Queen Annalise from spreading Vileblood influence, while demonstrating the Church's capability to overcome even supernatural threats through proper application of faith and determination. But the cost of this victory transformed Logarius himself into something that was neither human nor cosmic, trapped in a form of existence that combined the worst aspects of both mortality and transcendence. The binding that Logarius created to constrain Queen Annalise required him to establish a spiritual connection that could only be maintained through constant conscious effort. This wasn't simply a matter of performing a ritual and then waiting for the results to manifest, but rather a form of ongoing spiritual labor that required Logarius to dedicate every moment of his consciousness to maintaining the cosmic forces that kept the Vileblood Queen neutralized. The binding became not just a tactical achievement, but a way of life that consumed every aspect of his existence. The physical transformation that Logarius underwent as a result of maintaining this binding reveals the extent to which cosmic intervention can alter human nature in ways that exceed normal understanding of death and decay. His body became a kind of spiritual anchor that existed partially in normal physical reality and partially in cosmic dimensions that operated according to different temporal and causal principles. He remained conscious and aware but lost the ability to act meaningfully in the physical world beyond maintaining the binding that had become his sole purpose. The psychological impact of eternal vigil created forms of spiritual isolation that paralleled Queen Annalise's imprisonment, while adding dimensions of duty and responsibility that made Logarius's situation uniquely tragic. Where the Queen suffered from cosmic awareness combined with powerlessness, Logarius experienced the burden of cosmic responsibility without the satisfaction of meaningful accomplishment. His successful binding of Queen Annalise prevented immediate harm, but created new problems that required ongoing attention and maintenance. The religious conviction that had originally motivated Logarius's sacrifice gradually became both his only source of meaning and his greatest source of torment. His absolute faith in church doctrine provided the spiritual strength necessary to maintain his vigilance across years and decades of isolation, but it also prevented him from developing the kind of critical perspective that might have allowed him to question whether his sacrifice was producing beneficial results. His certainty that he was serving cosmic justice made it impossible for him to consider alternative approaches that might have achieved similar results with less suffering. The irony of Logarius's situation was that his success in binding Queen Annalise had created exactly the kind of cosmic horror that the Church claimed to oppose. His transformation into an eternal guardian represented a form of spiritual corruption that was arguably worse than anything the Vilebloods had achieved through their enhancement experiments. Where the Vilebloods had gained power and awareness while retaining their essential humanity, Logarius had become something that was neither fully human nor properly transcendent. The tactical effectiveness of Logarius's binding created precedents that influenced church policy in ways that may have done more harm than good. His demonstration that individual sacrifice could achieve cosmic intervention inspired other church warriors to attempt similar forms of spiritual binding and cosmic manipulation, but few possessed the combination of enhancement, conviction, and tactical skill that had made Logarius's sacrifice successful leading to failures that created new forms of cosmic horror rather than preventing existing threats. The loneliness that characterized Logarius's vigil was perhaps more complete than any other form of isolation depicted in the Bloodborne universe, where Queen Annalise retained the possibility of interaction with hunters who visited her castle. Logarius existed in a state that made meaningful communication impossible. His consciousness remained active and aware, but his ability to express himself or respond to external stimuli had been severely compromised by the binding he maintained. He became a living monument to duty and sacrifice that could observe but not participate in the world around him. The crown that Logarius wore as a symbol of his victory over the Vilebloods became both a trophy and a trap, representing his achievement while simultaneously serving as the physical focus for the binding that constrained his existence. The ornate headpiece, crafted from materials that suggested both royal authority and religious devotion, transformed from a symbol of triumph into an instrument of eternal imprisonment. Removing the crown would release both Logarius and Queen Annalise from their respective forms of cosmic bondage, but it would also eliminate the tactical advantages that his sacrifice had achieved. The weather that perpetually surrounded Cainhurst Castle seemed to reflect the spiritual state of its primary inhabitants, with snow and cold creating an atmosphere of suspended animation that paralleled the frozen existence of both Queen and Guardian. The eternal winter that gripped the castle grounds wasn't simply a meteorological phenomenon, but a manifestation of the spiritual stagnation that had settled over the entire location. Time itself seemed to move differently within Cainhurst's walls, creating a sense of temporal displacement that emphasized the unnatural nature of what had occurred there. The view from Logarius's tower position allowed him to observe the gradual decay of everything he had fought to protect, creating additional layers of psychological torment as he watched the consequences of his tactical success unfold over years and decades. He could see the empty halls of the castle below, the abandoned gardens returning to wilderness, the gradual erosion of the cultural achievements that had made Cainhurst significant. His vigil had preserved the form of victory while allowing its substance to crumble away beneath his watchful gaze. Chapter 19. The ripple effects of tragedy. The destruction of Cainhurst and the binding of its queen created consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical objectives that the Church had hoped to achieve. The elimination of Vilebloods society as an organized threat had indeed prevented the spread of uncontrolled blood enhancement, but it had also created power vacuums, moral complexities, and spiritual precedents that would influence events throughout the broader Bloodborne universe for generations to come. The Church's military solution to the Vileblood problem demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of using force to address cosmic threats. The other noble houses throughout the region watched the destruction of Cainhurst with a mixture of relief and terror that would fundamentally alter their relationships with both the Church and cosmic forces. On one hand, the elimination of the Vilebloods removed a potential rival whose supernatural capabilities had threatened the traditional aristocratic order. The Church's demonstration that even enhanced nobles could be defeated through proper organization and religious conviction provided reassurance that existing social hierarchies could be maintained despite the cosmic threats that were reshaping the world. But the methods used to achieve victory at Cainhurst also served as a warning about the Church's willingness to use violence against aristocratic targets when theological concerns outweighed political considerations. The noble houses recognized that their traditional privileges and ancient bloodlines would provide no protection if the Church decided that their activities threatened spiritual welfare or cosmic stability. This realization forced aristocratic society to reconsider its relationship with cosmic forces and its willingness to pursue enhancement outside Church supervision. The diplomatic implications of the Cainhurst assault created lasting tensions between Church authority and secular political structures that would influence regional politics for years to come. The Church's decision to attack a legitimate noble house without seeking broader political consultation established precedents for religious intervention in secular affairs that many aristocratic leaders found deeply troubling. The successful assault demonstrated that church forces possessed both the capability and the willingness to override traditional political authorities when cosmic concerns required direct action. These political tensions were complicated by the fact that the Church's victory at Cainhurst had clearly been necessary to prevent spiritual corruption that might have threatened everyone in the region. The Vilebloods' uncontrolled experimentation with cosmic forces and their development of blood-centered religious practices represented genuine threats that secular authorities were not equipped to address effectively. The Church's intervention had prevented problems that could have been far worse than the political disruption caused by their assault on aristocratic authority. The psychological impact of Cainhurst's destruction on ordinary citizens created complex reactions that reflected both fear of cosmic threats and concern about religious authority. Many people were relieved to learn that supernatural threats could be overcome through human agency and religious conviction, providing hope that the cosmic horror reshaping their world was not insurmountable. The Church's victory demonstrated that proper faith and organization could achieve results, even against enemies that seemed to exceed human capability. But the violence required to achieve victory at Cainhurst also created concerns about the methods that religious authorities were willing to use when pursuing cosmic objectives. The complete destruction of Vileblood society, including individuals who had not directly participated in threatening activities, suggested that Church leadership prioritized cosmic concerns over individual welfare in ways that might eventually threaten anyone who became involved with supernatural forces. This created psychological tensions between the desire for protection from cosmic threats and fear of becoming targets of religious enforcement. The theological implications of the Cainhurst assault forced Church scholars to develop new doctrines about the relationship between spiritual authority and political power, the conditions under which violence could be justified in cosmic conflicts, and the proper methods for dealing with supernatural threats that emerged within human society. The successful binding of Queen Annalise demonstrated that Church forces could achieve cosmic intervention through individual sacrifice, but it also raised questions about the spiritual costs of such methods and their compatibility with Church teachings about human dignity and spiritual development. The precedent established by Martyr Logarius's sacrifice influenced Church policy toward cosmic threats in ways that may have created more problems than they solved. His demonstration that individual dedication could achieve cosmic binding inspired other Church warriors to attempt similar forms of spiritual intervention, but few possessed the unique combination of enhancement, conviction, and tactical skill that had made his sacrifice successful. The failed attempts that followed created new forms of cosmic horror rather than preventing existing threats. The tactical lessons learned from the Cainhurst assault shaped Church military doctrine and training programs in ways that emphasized spiritual preparation and cosmic intervention over conventional military skills. The success achieved through Logarius's binding convinced Church leadership that individual faith and dedication were more important than tactical coordination or strategic planning when dealing with supernatural threats. This shift in emphasis produced Church forces that were highly motivated, but potentially less effective against enemies that could be defeated through conventional means. The economic consequences of Cainhurst's destruction eliminated one of the region's most important centers of artistic and cultural production, creating economic disruption that affected everyone, from master craftsmen to common laborers. The castle had supported hundreds of workers whose skills and products had been valued throughout the region, and their displacement created economic ripple effects that took years to resolve. The cultural treasures that had been destroyed during the assault represented losses that could never be recovered or replaced. The spiritual vacuum left by the elimination of Vileblood society created opportunities for other cosmic influences to establish themselves in the region, some of which proved to be more dangerous than the threats that the Church had originally sought to prevent. The same isolation and aristocratic pride that had made the Vilebloods vulnerable to cosmic manipulation characterized other noble houses, creating potential targets for cosmic forces that were seeking new opportunities for human enhancement and consciousness transformation. The moral complexity of the Church's victory at Cainhurst created lasting divisions within religious communities, between those who supported aggressive intervention against cosmic threats and those who believed that such methods violated essential spiritual principles. These theological disputes would influence church policy and practice for generations, creating internal conflicts that weakened the institution's ability to respond effectively to future cosmic challenges. The legend of Cainhurst that emerged from these events became both inspiration and warning for individuals who were considering their own relationships with cosmic forces and supernatural enhancement. The story of the Vilebloods' rise and fall provided valuable lessons about the dangers of pride, isolation, and uncontrolled cosmic communion, but it also demonstrated the terrible costs that could be paid for cosmic intervention and the ways in which even righteous action could create new forms of suffering and spiritual corruption. Chapter 20. The broader cosmic context. To fully understand the tragedy of Cainhurst and its place in the larger Bloodborne universe, we must step back and consider how the destruction of Vilebloods society fit into the broader cosmic projects that were reshaping human consciousness and society throughout the region. The forces that had originally enabled Vileblood transformation were part of vast, multi-dimensional experiments in consciousness evolution that affected not just individual noble houses, but entire civilizations across multiple planes of existence. The destruction of Cainhurst represented a significant setback for these cosmic projects, but it did not eliminate the underlying forces that had made Vileblood society possible. The Great Ones, whose reproductive needs had driven the creation of the Old Blood, continued to seek suitable surrogate children, despite the failure of the Cainhurst experiment. The destruction of Vileblood society had provided valuable data about human responses to cosmic enhancement and the factors that could lead to successful or failed transformation attempts. This information was being used to refine approaches to human consciousness manipulation and to identify alternative methods for creating the cosmic children that the Great Ones so desperately desired. The Church's successful intervention at Cainhurst had demonstrated that human religious institutions could achieve cosmic effects through proper application of faith and sacrifice, making church organizations attractive targets for cosmic influence and manipulation. The Great Ones recognized that religious conviction could provide the kind of sustained motivation necessary for maintaining cosmic bindings and spiritual interventions, suggesting that church institutions might be more useful for their reproductive projects than isolated aristocratic communities. The precedent established by Logarius's sacrifice created opportunities for cosmic forces to encourage similar forms of spiritual binding and cosmic intervention among church warriors and religious authorities. The Great Ones understood that humans who believed they were serving divine purposes would be more willing to undergo the kind of consciousness transformation that successful cosmic reproduction required. Religious conviction could be manipulated to produce exactly the kind of selfless dedication that cosmic parenthood demanded. The destruction of Cainhurst had also eliminated a potential source of resistance to cosmic manipulation, while demonstrating the effectiveness of using human religious institutions to police cosmic enhancement among other human communities. The Church's role as cosmic enforcer served the Great Ones' interests by preventing the development of independent human communities that might develop effective resistance to cosmic influence. By encouraging religious authorities to attack supernatural threats, the Great Ones could eliminate potential competitors while strengthening the religious institutions that were most useful for their own projects. The psychological impact of Cainhurst's destruction on human society created exactly the kind of fear and uncertainty that made populations more susceptible to cosmic manipulation and religious authority. The demonstration that even enhanced nobles could be destroyed through cosmic intervention encouraged ordinary humans to seek protection through religious institutions, making them more willing to undergo the kind of spiritual preparation and consciousness transformation that cosmic reproduction required. The theological developments that emerged from the Church's victory at Cainhurst gradually shifted religious doctrine in directions that served cosmic reproductive needs rather than genuine human spiritual development. The emphasis on individual sacrifice and cosmic intervention encouraged forms of religious practice that prepared believers for consciousness transformation, while discouraging the kind of critical thinking and independent judgment that might lead to effective resistance against cosmic manipulation. The political consequences of the Cainhurst assault created power structures that concentrated authority in religious institutions, while eliminating secular alternatives that might have provided different approaches to cosmic threats. The subordination of aristocratic authority to church doctrine ensured that cosmic policy would be determined by institutions that were already deeply influenced by the same forces they claimed to oppose. This created feedback loops that gradually increased cosmic influence, while eliminating sources of resistance. The economic disruption caused by Cainhurst's destruction forced displaced workers and artists to seek new sources of support and patronage, often through religious institutions that could provide the resources necessary for survival. This economic dependency made these individuals more susceptible to religious influence and more willing to participate in spiritual practices that served cosmic purposes rather than human interests. The destruction of independent cultural and economic centers concentrated social power in institutions that were most useful for cosmic manipulation. The cultural impact of losing Cainhurst's artistic and intellectual achievements eliminated sources of independent thought and creative expression that might have provided alternative perspectives on cosmic forces and their influence on human society. The sophisticated culture that the Vilebloods had developed had included philosophical and artistic traditions that could have served as foundations for understanding and resisting cosmic manipulation. The destruction of these cultural resources left human society more dependent on religious institutions for intellectual and spiritual guidance. The spiritual vacuum created by the elimination of Vilebloods society was gradually filled by religious practices and cosmic influences that were more rather than less dangerous than the original threats the Church had sought to eliminate. The same psychological and social needs that had made Vileblood transformation appealing to aristocratic society created demand for alternative forms of enhancement and transcendence that cosmic forces could exploit for their own reproductive purposes. The long-term consequences of the Church's victory at Cainhurst gradually became apparent as religious institutions throughout the region developed increasingly sophisticated methods for identifying and recruiting individuals who possessed the psychological and spiritual characteristics that made them suitable for cosmic transformation. The tactical success that had been achieved through individual sacrifice encouraged systematic approaches to consciousness manipulation that affected entire populations rather than isolated communities. The legend of Cainhurst that emerged from these events served cosmic purposes by providing both warning and inspiration for individuals who were considering their own relationships with supernatural forces. The story discouraged independent experimentation with cosmic enhancement, while encouraging reliance on religious authority for spiritual guidance and protection. This narrative framework made human society more rather than less vulnerable to the cosmic influences that had originally created the problems the Church claimed to solve. The ultimate irony of the Church's victory at Cainhurst was that it had achieved tactical success while serving strategic purposes that belonged to the same cosmic forces it opposed. The destruction of Vileblood society had eliminated a potential source of resistance to cosmic manipulation while strengthening the religious institutions that were most useful for cosmic reproductive projects. The Church's demonstration of cosmic intervention capability had provided the Great Ones with valuable data about human consciousness transformation while encouraging forms of religious practice that made human society more susceptible to cosmic influence. Chapter 21. The Eternal Return. As our long journey through the tragedy of Cainhurst draws to a close, we find ourselves confronting the most disturbing aspect of this entire narrative: the cyclical nature of cosmic horror, and the ways in which apparent victories over supernatural threats often simply create new opportunities for the same forces to achieve their incomprehensible goals through different methods. The destruction of Vileblood society and the binding of Queen Annalise represented genuine tactical achievements that prevented immediate threats and demonstrated human capability for cosmic intervention. But these successes occurred within larger patterns of cosmic manipulation that continued to operate regardless of individual victories or defeats. The empty halls of Cainhurst Castle stand today as monuments to the futility of human ambition when confronted with forces that operate according to principles that exceed human comprehension. The beautiful art that once adorned these walls, the sophisticated culture that once flourished within these chambers, the refined society that once represented the pinnacle of aristocratic achievement, all of it has been reduced to memories preserved in stone and shadow. The castle has become a museum of failure, a testament to the ways in which even the most successful human societies can be destroyed by their contact with cosmic consciousness. Yet, the tragedy of Cainhurst extends beyond simple destruction to encompass the ways in which the responses to cosmic threats can create new forms of horror that exceed the original problems they were designed to solve. The binding of Queen Annalise created suffering that may be more profound than anything the Vilebloods had experienced during their transformation, while the eternal vigil of Martyr Logarius demonstrated how religious conviction can become a form of spiritual imprisonment that traps individuals in cycles of duty and sacrifice that serve no meaningful purpose. The Church's victory at Cainhurst established precedents and created institutions that would influence cosmic policy throughout the region for generations to come. The executioners who had successfully assaulted the castle became models for future Church warriors, while the methods used to achieve victory were refined and systematized for application against other supernatural threats. But each successive application of these methods created new opportunities for cosmic forces to study human responses and develop more effective approaches to consciousness manipulation. The hunters who visit Cainhurst today encounter not just a ruined castle, but a living laboratory where the consequences of cosmic ambition continue to unfold. Queen Annalise's offer of covenant membership provides these hunters with opportunities to repeat the same mistakes that had originally doomed Vilebloods society, while the rewards she can provide create incentives for behaviors that serve cosmic reproductive needs rather than human interests. The cycle of cosmic manipulation continues despite the apparent destruction of its original manifestation. The blood dregs that hunters collect and offer to Queen Annalise serve the same cosmic purposes that had originally driven the creation of Vilebloods society, providing the Great Ones with the consciousness samples and spiritual resources necessary for their ongoing reproductive experiments. The broken covenant system that operates through Queen Annalise's imprisonment allows cosmic forces to continue their consciousness manipulation projects, while avoiding the political attention that had led to the Church's intervention against the original Vilebloods society. The moral complexities that hunters face when deciding whether to join the Vileblood Covenant reflect broader questions about the possibility of ethical action in a universe dominated by cosmic forces that treat human welfare as a secondary consideration. The choice to provide comfort to Queen Annalise through covenant membership involves hunters in spiritual systems that may perpetuate cosmic manipulation, while the choice to reject her offers may abandon a suffering individual to eternal isolation without achieving any meaningful protection against cosmic threats. The weapons and capabilities that Queen Annalise grants to successful covenant members demonstrate the continuing operation of cosmic enhancement systems, despite the apparent failure of Vilebloods society. The Chikage, the Rita Pelachesh, the Evelyn, these tools embody approaches to combat and spiritual development that originated in Vileblood culture, but continue to serve cosmic purposes through their use by individual hunters. The enhancement that these weapons provide makes hunters more effective against some threats, while potentially making them more vulnerable to cosmic manipulation. The ongoing existence of Cainhurst as a location that hunters can visit and explore serves cosmic purposes by providing a controlled environment where human responses to cosmic horror can be studied and documented. The castle's preservation in its post-assault state creates opportunities for cosmic forces to observe how individuals react to evidence of failed cosmic transformation and the consequences of religious intervention against supernatural threats. The story of Cainhurst that has emerged from these events serves as both warning and instruction for human society, teaching lessons about the dangers of cosmic communion while also providing examples of successful cosmic intervention that can be studied and replicated. The narrative framework that has developed around Vilebloods society and its destruction shapes human understanding of cosmic threats in ways that may make society more, rather than less, vulnerable to future manipulation. The ultimate question that emerges from our exploration of Cainhurst's tragedy is whether human consciousness is capable of developing effective resistance to cosmic manipulation, or whether the very characteristics that make humans valuable as surrogate children ensure that all attempts at cosmic transcendence will ultimately serve alien reproductive needs rather than human spiritual development. The sophistication and intelligence that the Vilebloods achieved through their transformation made them more rather than less useful for cosmic purposes, suggesting that human enhancement may inevitably lead to cosmic enslavement. The isolation that characterized both Queen Annalise's imprisonment and Logarius's eternal vigil reflects the fundamental loneliness that pervades cosmic consciousness in the Bloodborne universe. The Great Ones who drive these cycles of transformation and destruction are themselves trapped in forms of existence that prevent meaningful connection or satisfaction, creating cosmic systems that reproduce their own suffering on smaller scales throughout human society. The tragedy of Cainhurst represents not just human failure, but cosmic failure, the inability of transcendent consciousness to create the kind of meaningful relationships and spiritual fulfillment that give existence purpose and value. As we leave the snow-covered halls of Cainhurst behind and return to our own concerns and challenges, we carry with us the knowledge that the forces that destroyed Vilebloods society continue to operate throughout our world. The old blood still flows through human consciousness, the Great Ones still seek their impossible children, and the cycles of enhancement and corruption continue to reshape human society in ways that serve alien purposes rather than human interests. The castle stands as a warning about the costs of cosmic ambition, but it also serves as a reminder that these costs will continue to be paid by individuals and societies who lack the knowledge or power to resist forces that exceed human comprehension. Conclusion: the vampire kingdom that never was. And so we reach the end of our journey through one of Bloodborne's most haunting and complex tragedies. Cainhurst Castle stands eternal in its snowy isolation, a monument to ambition, nobility, and the terrible price of cosmic transcendence. What we've discovered together isn't just the story of a vampire kingdom, but a meditation on power, isolation, and the fundamental loneliness that pervades existence when consciousness expands beyond human limitations. The Vilebloods never truly became the vampire aristocracy they envisioned. Instead, they became something far more tragic: cosmic orphans trapped between human limitation and transcendent horror, achieving neither the satisfaction of mortality nor the fulfillment of genuine cosmic consciousness. Queen Annalise sits still upon her throne, immortal but powerless, wise but isolated, royal but utterly alone. Her kingdom exists only in memory and in the broken covenant that draws hunters to her side, seeking power that comes at prices they cannot fully comprehend. Martyr Logarius maintains his eternal vigil, a testament to the terrible costs of absolute conviction. His victory achieved its tactical objectives while creating spiritual imprisonment that may be worse than the corruption he sought to prevent. The crown he wears is both trophy and trap, symbol of triumph and instrument of eternal suffering. His sacrifice demonstrates that even the most righteous actions can create cycles of horror that exceed the problems they were meant to solve. The empty halls of Cainhurst remind us that beauty, culture, and refinement provide no protection against cosmic forces that operate according to principles beyond human understanding. The sophisticated society that the Vilebloods created was not destroyed because it was evil or corrupt, but because it served purposes that had nothing to do with human welfare or aristocratic ideals. Their transformation was both achievement and trap, enhancement and enslavement, transcendence and spiritual death. The hunters who visit Cainhurst today face the same temptations and choices that originally doomed Vilebloods society. The covenant that Queen Annalise offers provides genuine power and spiritual insight, but it also perpetuates cosmic cycles that may serve alien reproductive needs rather than human development. The moral complexities of engaging with her broken spiritual system reflect broader questions about the possibility of ethical action in a universe dominated by forces that treat human consciousness as raw material for incomprehensible projects. Perhaps the most profound lesson that Cainhurst offers is about the nature of cosmic loneliness and the ways in which transcendent consciousness can become a form of existential imprisonment. The Great Ones who originally enabled Vileblood transformation suffer from the same fundamental isolation that characterizes Queen Annalise's imprisonment and Logarius's vigil. Their vast power and multi-dimensional awareness cannot compensate for their inability to form meaningful relationships or achieve genuine satisfaction. They create cycles of suffering, not from malevolence, but from desperate attempts to escape loneliness that their very nature makes insurmountable. The vampire kingdom that Cainhurst represented was never truly possible because the cosmic forces that enable such transformation operate according to principles that make genuine community and meaningful relationship impossible. The Vilebloods achieved supernatural power and extended lifespans, but they lost the essential human connections that give existence meaning and purpose. Their enhancement was real, but it served cosmic needs rather than human fulfillment. As we close this exploration of one of gaming's most complex and tragic narratives, we're left with questions that resist simple answers. Can human consciousness develop effective resistance to cosmic manipulation? Is transcendence possible without spiritual enslavement? Can we achieve enhancement and power while maintaining the connections and values that make such achievement meaningful? The story of Cainhurst suggests that these questions may not have satisfying answers, but the very characteristics that make humans appealing as cosmic surrogate children may ensure that all attempts at transcendence ultimately serve alien purposes rather than human development. The sophistication and refinement that aristocratic culture achieved made the Vilebloods more rather than less vulnerable to cosmic manipulation, suggesting that intelligence and achievement may create opportunities for exploitation rather than protection. Yet the tragedy of Cainhurst also demonstrates the profound value of human connection, compassion, and the courage to resist forces that exceed our understanding. The hunters who visit Queen Annalise and choose to provide comfort rather than seek power, who approach her broken covenant with empathy rather than ambition, who recognize her suffering and respond with humanity rather than calculation. These individuals represent hope that human consciousness can maintain its essential characteristics, even when confronted with cosmic horror. The vampire kingdom that never was remains a powerful symbol of humanity's greatest ambitions and most tragic limitations. Cainhurst represents what we might achieve if we could transcend mortality while retaining meaning, gain power while preserving purpose, enhance ourselves while maintaining our essential humanity. But it also demonstrates why such transcendence may be fundamentally impossible, why the very act of reaching beyond human limitations may destroy the human characteristics that make such reaching valuable. The snow continues to fall on Cainhurst's empty halls. Queen Annalise maintains her lonely vigil. Martyr Logarius preserves his eternal watch. And somewhere in the cosmic depths beyond human perception, the Great Ones continue their desperate search for the children they can never successfully create. The cycle continues, the tragedy persists, and the vampire kingdom that never was serves as both warning and inspiration for all who dare to dream of transcendence in a universe that may make such dreams impossible to fulfill without losing everything that makes them worth pursuing. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of Bloodborne's most profound and haunting tales. Rest well, fellow hunters, and may you find in dreams the peace that eludes those who seek transcendence in waking hours. The night is long, but morning always comes, even if only in memory, even if only in hope, even if only in the stories we tell to make sense of darkness that exceeds our understanding. Until next time, may the good blood guide your way, and may you find strength in the knowledge that even in the face of cosmic horror, human compassion and connection remain the most powerful forces in any universe. Sweet dreams.